This is Jocko podcast number 362 with Echo Charles and me, Jocko Willink. Good evening, Echo.
Good evening.
So, I was in officer candidate school, 1998. It's a form of military indoctrination. I was already in the military. I had already been indoctrinated in the military. So as I was going through it, I was a little bit more detached. You know, I could see a little bit more, had a little bit more experience. And there's all kinds of procedures and protocols that you have to follow when you're going to officer candidate school. You gotta fold your underwear into a 5-inch by 5-inch square for a locker inspection. You've got to they come and measure it with a steel ruler. The drill instructors, Marine Corps drill instructors, they have like their own personal. You know, somebody has a possession that you can see it kind of has a certain level of pride to it. They would have these steel rulers and slap it down on that thing. And they're going to measure your handkerchief and your T-shirts and all this stuff. And it's about attention to detail, which is cool. It's about protocols, learning protocols, and inspecting each other. So as a team, so you might check my locker and we're trying to help each other out. But one thing that always stuck with me on the protocol level was the belt buckle that you had. So you get issued this belt buckle. And this belt buckle, when you get issued it, it's shiny gold. And it's shiny gold. It's probably brass, actually. But then there's a clear enamel coat on it. And what that means is you can buy this thing and it won't just tarnish because it's got this really strong, clear enamel coat on it. It's very thin, but that's what keeps it from tarnishing. But you can still get fingerprints on the enamel. So you could have a belt buckle that has like a fingerprint on it or a smudge on it. So you would wipe them off. You kind of like wipe down your belt buckle. Now here's the thing. At some point, this had evolved to where you would take your belt buckle that had this enamel on it and you would polish it until the enamel was gone. And so now it could tarnish. So you remove the protective layer so that it could tarnish. So something that started as a good idea, which is you buff the belt buckle so there's no fingerprints on it, escalated over time to where you were polishing this thing until all the enamel was removed, and now it would tarnish more easily, and it's actually hard to take care of now. So this thing that started with good intent, oh, you're going to make sure there's no fingerprints on it, turned into craziness. And no one knows where it started. Like, no one knows when it got stupid. And no one knows when we ended up at officer candidate school making people do something stupid, but we did it. And this can happen with anything. Now there's a similar term in a similar situation, there's a term in political discourse called the Overton window. The Overton window, this term was originated by a guy that was named Joseph Overton, who was a political scientist and a libertarian type dude. And he actually died flying an ultralight at age 43. But this idea of the Overton window is that there's a window in the acceptance of ideas. So ideas go through a transition. So let's say there's an idea out there. It starts off, when the idea first comes to light, it's totally unthinkable. Totally unthinkable, meaning totally unacceptable. And then it actually, as people talk about it more and it becomes more familiar, it goes from being unthinkable or totally unacceptable to just radical. Like, so you're not saying, oh, that's unacceptable. You're just saying, oh, that's pretty radical. And then eventually it moves to being like a fringe idea, but now it's moving into the acceptable category. Then eventually it becomes acceptable, and then it becomes sensible, and then it becomes popular, and then it eventually becomes policy. And there's a bunch of things that kind of we've watched go through this evolution. I mean, tattoos, right? Tattoos. Years ago, tattoos were kind of unacceptable in normal society. It was like bikers. Bikers had tattoos and convicts had tattoos. It wasn't normal. Now, the tattoos are basically totally acceptable. Long hair for men, which I don't support. but hey, but long hair for men in the 1940s, totally unacceptable. In the 1950s and 60s, it was, in the 50s, it was like radical. In the 60s, it was like kind of normal. Now it's just acceptable. So as people push the envelope with behavior, the Overton window expands and things become more acceptable and norms change over time. And it's also true that as one part of the Overton window opens, another part closes. So years ago, if you were firing someone because they had a tattoo, or you fired someone because they had long hair, now that would be unacceptable. The guy had long hair. You can't just fire someone because they had long hair. That would be unacceptable now. So what am I talking about? How do these two things relate? The belt buckle and the Overton window. Well, it certainly seems to me that as we look at the way society is evolving today, the Overton window of what's acceptable has expanded and moved so much that it might not make sense anymore. What some things that are now not only acceptable, but now sort of getting pushed, you wonder if they make sense, and maybe they could actually even be harmful. And I think if we as people aren't careful, we can kind of slowly drift around inside that Overton window from the positive of having an open mind to an extreme to where there's no more guardrails, there's no more framework, and there's no more baseline of what's acceptable and what isn't. So a friend of mine, it seems to me, has been trying to maintain some kind of sanity, some kind of rationality to the expansion of the Overton window to apply some baseline to the world. And I think it's been a pretty good fight for her. I think she's just getting warmed up. She's a former congresswoman. She's a former presidential candidate. She's an Army officer, Iraq war veteran, a podcaster, a surfer, martial artist, and a Hawaiian. She's been on this podcast before, episode 272. Her name is Tulsi Gabbard, and it's an honor to have her back with us tonight. Tulsi Gabbard.
Aloha.
How's it going? There's been a lot going on in your world.
Yeah.
It's been crazy. It's been kind of crazy to watch. When you came on this podcast for the first time, you were a Democratic. I don't know if you were running for president. Were you running for president at the time?
I think, if I'm not mistaken, this was in late 2020.
I don't know. I should have checked
and
the dates.
And so I think if I'm not mistaken, I think the presidential campaign was finished at that point in time. And we were talking about how it went.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's always interesting to me because I have some of my friends are dope smoking hippies. Some of them are right-wing conservative fundamentalist Christians and everything in between. And when you came on my podcast, some of the first time you came on, some of my super conservative friends were like, yo, why are you giving her a platform? I was like, oh, because she's cool and I like her. And then some of my dope smoking hippie friends were like, hell yeah, that's what I'm talking about. So you had sort of I think you had a reputation or an image, I think, and you more than that, I think you just get categorized, right? You were a Democrat at the time, which I know you aren't anymore.
Time. Yep.
So what happened, man? What happened? Let's talk about that. So you left the Democratic Party.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'll just say, for as long as I've been in politics, people who like to put other humans in categories have always had trouble putting me in a category. Just because I've always been a very independent-minded person. So, I first ran for office in 2002 in Hawaii. I was 21 years old, very passionate about environmental issues and protecting the beauty of our home in Hawaii, the water, oceans, and that was my motivation to run for state house. And, prior to that point, I had no familial political affiliation. There was no my daddy and granddaddy were Democrats, so I have to be a Democrat. My parents were very hey, you go make your own decisions, figure out what is your foundational principles? And so at that time, I really had to look, because I had to, file the piece of paper saying I'm running for office, and there was a box to check, like, okay, fine, what party are you going to run under? And so I started looking at kind of the origins in Hawaii, the Democratic Party. Hawaii had been under the rule of a few very wealthy Republicans since it became a territory of the United States, and then later through statehood. And the shift towards democratic politics in Hawaii came about because of plantation workers, people who were being treated like crap, like in inhumane conditions, being paid pennies for working super long hours. It was basically like glorified slave labor. And so it was the Democratic Party and the ILWU that came in and was like, no, this is not okay. And so it was the party that, in our history in Hawaii, was the big tent inclusive party. It was the party for the people. It was the party that stood up against those few very wealthy people in power and said, no, you can't just abuse people like this. It was the party that stood for civil liberties and individual freedom and choice. Like, hey, whatever your personal choice is, whether it's free speech or freedom of religion or whatever it is, like, live and let live. We can disagree without being disagreeable. And so I looked at the party in Hawaii, and I looked at leaders like JFK and Dr. Martin Luther King, and I was drawn to the Democratic Party for those reasons. Because again, as I looked at Hawaii, I was like, these super rich Republican dudes have been abusing their power to fill their pockets at the expense of the well-being of the people. And so fast forward, I left the Democrat Party because all of those things that I just talked about are gone. The leaders of today's Democratic Party don't believe in really freedom, basically what it comes down to. And you look at that freedom of choice, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and there's a lot of other issues that I could get into, but ultimately, how do you have a political party that's in power that doesn't believe in freedom and is actively taking action to undermine our Constitution and Bill of Rights? And that was really what was at the crux of why I left the Democrat Party.
Was there a straw that broke the camel's back?
There wasn't one single moment, but it was really over the last few years, 2-3 years, seeing this increasing, quickly escalating towards policies coming from our government that really, frankly, were becoming increasingly authoritarian. And so, it caused me to kind of spend time reflecting and being introspective, like, wait, hold on a second. And people saying, like, how can you call yourself a Democrat? And I was obviously, like I said, I've always been an independent-minded person. I've been critical of people in power, whether they were Republicans or Democrats, and also complimentary when I felt like they did things that were good for the country. But looking at the dangerous combination of what we've seen over the last few years, especially of people in power who don't believe in the Constitution, who openly question things like the First Amendment and right to free speech, coupled with, oh, by the way, they control and are politicizing agencies like the Department of Justice and the FBI and Department of Homeland Security, sicking the newly formed domestic terror unit of the Department of Homeland Security on parents protesting at Board of Education meetings because they're like, well, we don't agree with what you guys are trying to teach our young kids at school. And to see that playing out before our eyes, and this culture of fear where if you speak out against this stuff and call it for what it is, you are immediately labeled anti-authority, and also therefore, coming from our government, an extremist and a potential threat, a potential domestic threat. And so that's why you're talking about the Overton window, and you look at okay, well, you take people having open minds and okay, well, I can consider, someone else's perspective, even if I don't agree with it, which is how things should be in general. And then you take it to that next level where you're saying, well, there are no guardrails anymore. And this is what's so dangerous is when you have, again, people are entitled to their own opinions, but when you have people in positions of power in this country who deny the existence of objective truth, as they are, then where's the floor? Where's the guardrails? Where's the ceiling? How do you measure anything? Well, it's like, okay, well, whatever's true is whatever they say is true. But then what happens when they're gone and the next person or group of people come in, or the next party, and then what if they don't agree with what that group says is true or false? And so and then you couple that with the fear factor and cancel culture and people literally seeing what happens to people like me, where you just say like, hey, well, this is what's happening, and it's crazy, it's insane, and then I get called all kinds of names and all kinds of stuff. All kinds of attacks. And so no wonder so many people are afraid to do the equivalent of like, yeah, obviously the emperor has no clothes. Like, we can all see it. And there's a lot of concern about what's happening, but so few people feel like they have the ability to speak up without being worried about losing their job, or being shunned by friends or family members, or being like that crazy person. And so this is kind of one thing that's been interesting and hope inspiring is, you know, I put out this kind of long and in-depth statement talking about some of these very specific examples of what's wrong with today's Democrat Party. And I've been hearing from a lot of people I know, a lot of people I don't know, in person, on social media, people just saying like in a really serious and heavy kind of way, thank you for bringing voice to the things that I've been feeling and been frustrated with, but you know, haven't been able to give voice to. And so my hope is that, you know, the more we speak up, the more people feel as though they can speak up. And how do we protect people? How do we protect our freedoms that are under attack? By exercising them.
Yeah, I always like to cover a book on this podcast.
Yeah.
And when you were coming on, I said I was thinking about covering the book Rules for Radicals by Saul Alinsky. This is a book, you know, this is a guy that this is a book that Hillary Clinton wrote her thesis on when she graduated from college. But there's some of those rules. One of the rules is hold them to their own rules, right? And that's what you're talking about when you say, hey, this is America, we have an open mind. And so you go, okay, cool. Then you have to accept everything, right? That's like one of those things. You can't say anything negative about anybody anytime, or you're not following your own rules of...
You're something phobic.
Right.
Everything is something phobic. You just add whatever it is at the beginning of it.
Yep.
Yeah.
And another one of the rules that he talks about is the power of ridicule. So when you just go on an obliterating attack on a person, it's overwhelming for him, and it works, and it's worked a lot to shut people down and shut them up. And that's you can see some of the way that these rules are implemented, and that's another thing. You know, as I talk about that belt buckle thing, and you don't know where it came from, and there's a bunch of things like that in the military. There's a bunch of traditions. You go, this is stupid. Why are we doing this? And people don't really know where it came from. And I think some of the things that are going on with society right now, if you start to pull the thread on where it actually initiated, a lot of it did initiate in like the radicals, the communists in the 60s that were trying to make their impact. And I honestly don't think a lot of people that are fully on board with that program know where it came from today. Yeah. They're just doing what they kind of learned. Yeah. Because that was, you know, a big goal was to take over the universities, which obviously they did a pretty good job taking over the universities. What is it? The universities vote 99% Democratic in universities. That's obviously you're not going to get a very balanced education if that's what you're going through. And then the scary thing is, and this is another thing we've talked about a bit on this podcast, and it is the complete plasticity of people's brains and how people you get into an echo chamber, or you start following and listening to certain things. It's going to take over your mind, and that's really, really scary. And you know, I've been saying lately, like, everyone's getting brainwashed. I'm getting brainwashed right now. Like, that's what's happening. If you're watching, if you're listening, if you're opening your mind and letting other things in there, you're getting brainwashed. And that's what's happening to everybody all the time. It's sort of like, it's a combination of brainwashing and learning, right? If you're learning, you're kind of getting brainwashed. You're bringing in new ideas. But then you see people that are learning ideas that aren't, essentially, they're not good. They're not healthy. And it's very, very disturbing. And especially nowadays where that brainwashing is in your pocket. Yeah. And at any moment you can pull it out and you can get brainwashed at any moment. And it's really, really scary. And especially, you know, the moldability of children.
Yeah.
14-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 19 years old. You know, it's like when I joined the military. You're going to get brainwashed to some level. Mm-hmm. I got in trouble when I went to boot camp.
That surprises me.
I didn't get in trouble because they didn't know who said it. We had to fill out a form like about how boot camp was going, but it was anonymous. And they wrote something like, you know, what do you think of the program so far? And I wrote, the brainwashing has been very effective. That's what I wrote.
How old were you at the time?
19,
okay.
18 or 19.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's because I had a very rebellious mind, you know, because I was like, what was I brainwashed by? I was brainwashed before I joined the military by hardcore music and punk rock and like anti-authoritarianism. And so for me, they were trying to hit me with that stuff and I kind of had some good resistance to it. So I kind of like, oh, they're trying to brainwash me. And then I kind of made a joke about it. The brainwashing has been, you know, effective thus far, which that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to get you to like change your brain a little bit and think in a different way. And but at least I think I always had that rebellious streak in me that always questions everything. And to this day, when I see something online, I'm like, oh, well, what's their angle?
Yeah.
What's the angle over there? Because everyone's got an angle.
Everyone does.
Which is disturbing. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so this is what's happening now with kids, and you can see it, and it's sad.
Yeah.
It's so sad to see. I listened to a podcast that you did on your podcast, which is called The Tulsi Gabbard Show, with, what is it? Is it called Detransitioning?
Yeah, with Chloe Cole.
That was horrifying.
Exactly.
It was absolutely horrifying. Give us a quick brief on her.
So Chloe Cole, and I'm glad you mentioned that because it's a perfect example of what you're talking about here. She grew up here in California. She was a tomboy as a kid growing up, loved playing video games, loved hanging out with her brothers. And at 11 years old, she got a smartphone, started an Instagram account. She was a tomboy, didn't have many female friends, didn't really fit in much at school, so was looking for some kind of companionship, friendship, sense of belonging online. And the algorithms on Instagram specifically, she talks about, immediately started feeding her posts and accounts of young girls and women who are identifying as boys or men, who are trans, or talking about how much happier they were by doing so and all of this. And then she had people around her who were telling her, well, like, if you're not happy as you are, then you're obviously a boy stuck in a girl's body. I'm going to just be...
And just, she's
11. She's 11.
12.
11 years old. Her name is Chloe. At 12 years old, she told her parents, she wrote them a long letter, and the gist of it was, I am a boy, and I want you to call me Leo. I encourage you to listen to the story in her voice as she tells it, because it is heartbreaking and so powerful. If you watch it on YouTube, you just look into her eyes. She's 18 now. And so, but the summary is, she starts taking puberty blockers when she's like 12, 13 years old. And she was very certain about what she wanted to do. Her parents were naturally pretty confused and not knowing what to do to best care for and love their daughter. And so they went out and started looking for health professionals to, like, hey, just like educate us, talk us through this. What are the, potential medical and health ramifications of our daughter taking these puberty blockers? And with the exception of one endocrinologist who told them like, hey, we don't know what the negative consequences might be, both in the short term and the long term to this, because there's just, it's not been studied very well. There's no long history of cases that we can point to say, well, here's what you can expect based on fact and science. And so this endocrinologist was saying like, I would encourage you to think very seriously before doing this because it could end up badly, essentially. I forget what the name, I think it was a gender specialist was what they're called, who were helping guide her through this. Every other medical professional that she went to see basically urged her and encouraged her to move forward with this, and ultimately told her parents, who were expressing some concern and reservations, you have a choice between having a live son or a dead daughter. And Chloe says that up until that, like at that point, she had never once had a suicidal thought enter her mind. So this warning and essentially this threat that these medical professionals were giving to this young girl's parents, a live son or a dead daughter, you decide, was based on nothing according to Chloe's medical history. Fast forward, she ends up getting a double mastectomy when she's 15 years old to continue this transition. She talks about how they call it top surgery to try to, soften what it really is. And it was after she got that surgery that she had a realization, I think she was 16 at the time, that she would never be able to breastfeed her child, ever. That had been taken away from her because of this decision. And, she talks about how she was asked at different points along this path from when she was 12 through 15, like, okay, well, here's all these medical disclosures and, you might not be able to have kids. This could affect your fertility. And at 12 years old, she's like, man, I don't want kids. Like, how does a 12-year-old girl make that decision? And then again, at 15, before this surgery, like, okay, well, you might not be able to do this or have kids or breastfeed. And, again, children not being equipped to make these decisions. At 16, she experienced incredible regret and realized she'd make the biggest mistake of her life. And then began to walk down that path of quote unquote detransitioning. And she talks about what that meant in practical terms in her conversations with her parents and friends and family, being completely shunned by this group of, people who are pushing this trans and gender ideology. Now people who celebrated her one day and the very next day, once she was like, no, I've made the biggest mistake of my life, completely shunning her, calling her names, giving her death threats online. Doctors who had cared for her one day, the next day, once she had made this decision, not returning phone calls or telling her like, she's still having serious medical issues based on the mastectomy she had that she can't figure out what to do with. And the doctors are like, oh, just put some Vaseline on there. And ultimately these doctors are not providing her with the kind of care that she needs or being responsive at all. So she's actually filed a lawsuit against these doctors and Kaiser that she dealt with along the way, which is so brave of her to do. She's so incredibly courageous to be doing what she's doing and speaking out and actively encouraging others to do the same so that people are able to be better informed. But that social contagion that she talks really clearly about, of the algorithms having such a heavy influence on her as a young girl, to ultimately bring her to make this decision, along with other things as well. But the lack of, I guess this phenomena in our society right now, where there's no open conversation about this that she could turn to, that her family could turn to get a differing perspective or differing view, to where doctors feel afraid to say anything about it. I talked to a friend of mine who's an ER doc actually in California, and he said, Tulsi, I would say this off the record, but there are a lot of kids who are coming into the ER who are experiencing, suicidal thoughts or deep depression or other medical issues because of this transition of people who are similarly like Chloe Cole, regretting these decisions that they've made as kids. But nobody's talking about it. Even from the very top of where he works, it was just like all of a sudden, okay, hey guys, we're doing this now. And by the way, it's a very profitable venture, knowing that not only the initial treatments, but you're basically, once somebody comes and tells you they want to do this, you're talking about years of follow-on care and drugs and so on and so forth. But there was no conversation about this at all, because it's not allowed. If you even raise a question and say, hey, is this really the best thing? Like, are kids really equipped to make this decision when they're 11 or 12 years old? You're immediately labeled a transphobe, and how dare you not care for your kids? In that podcast episode that I put out, there are actual videos from Boston Children's Hospital as one example of, unfortunately, many, where they're literally saying as soon as your child is capable of expressing themselves, you'll see signs of them, deciding what their gender identity is. Like, before they can even use words and speak any kind of language, that you look at like gestures and you look at all these different things. And you see how dangerous this is when critical thinking is like, it's discouraged. Asking questions is discouraged. Having differing points of view is discouraged. And I think even using the word discouraged is putting it lightly. People get banned on social media, get their accounts, suspended indefinitely for asking questions or saying, hey, this is not appropriate for kids. Again, then you add on the layer of government. And this is where things get so dangerous, is that, Chloe mentions that she knows people personally parents who've had their kids taken away from them simply because they refuse to call them by a name or pronoun different than the one they were given at birth, by Child Protective Services, by the government. And this is the very real consequence of people just being willing to go along. And maybe it's like, I don't know, this doesn't seem right, but at least it's not happening to me or my kids or my family, so I'm just going to put my head in the sand and not pay attention. But there's so many different factors you start looking at. I mentioned parents going and protesting, like, no, you know what? I don't want my 7-year-old kid being given books to read at school about, like, well, tell me what your sexuality is, or tell me what your gender identity is. I heard parents talk about this stuff, and I thought, gosh, this is really concerning. And then I met with a bunch of parents in Virginia who've been on the group called Parents Defending Education, who've been kind of on the front lines of this fight nationally. And they brought a stack of books and showed me. And there was one in particular that it was a graphic novel for middle schoolers. And I had never seen such sexually graphic images ever in my life. And this is something that's being given to kids to help them, figure out, what their sexuality is. And it's really disturbing that we live in a society today where this open marketplace of ideas is not allowed to occur. And it's not allowed to occur because we have people in power who are using the levers of government, working with people in the media and in big tech to control speech and to influence our society.
So when I was a kid, let's say you were going to get crazy and really rebel, you'd grow your hair out, right? And wear a jean jacket or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, you're listening to Metallica and you're going to go through your Metallica phase. And back then, Metallica was not the same Metallica that it is now. I mean, back then, Metallica was kind of fringe radical, right? And so you were going to grow your hair out and you were making all kinds of dumb decisions. I mean, let's face it. When you're that young, you're making just bad decisions left and right. And so, thankfully, your decisions aren't permanent. When I was a kid, our decisions weren't permanent. Maybe you get some tattoos that you're going to want to wear, a shirt or something when you get older. Hopefully you didn't jump straight into the neck tattoos again, Overton window on face tattoos and neck tattoos. I mean, they're becoming more and more mainstream right now, but back in the day, you weren't going to be doing that kind of thing when you were certainly not 11, 12, 13.
Yeah.
And then you think about
nor would your parents let you.
Yeah, well, there's another piece of this. Like, at some point, saying shut up to people became bad, right? When I was a kid, you tell people, your parents would tell you to shut up, your teacher would tell you to shut up, you would tell your friends to shut up. When you were doing something, when you were saying something stupid, somebody would be like, hey, shut up. And at some point, that became like a bad word. Do your kids say shut up, Echo Charles?
Not to me specifically, but yeah, they say that. So.
Okay, but if they said it to you, be offensive.
There'd be consequences.
Which I agree with. I agree with. You don't want. I don't want to expect a kid. But do you tell your kids to shut up?
I can't remember, but I'm not against the word shut up at all.
Okay, I probably don't say shut up enough, and I don't think America does right now, because sometimes like, when I was a kid, it's like I'd have some stupid idea, and my dad would be like, shut up. I was like, okay, you got to stop sometimes. When we realize how moldable these kids are and gullible they are, I mean, this is when you see like the interviews or read interviews. I got a book I haven't done on the podcast yet, but it's Nazis.
Yeah.
The young Nazi kids, they were 100%. They didn't know anything else. At least a lot of them. And same thing with the kamikaze pilots that are 19 years old. They didn't know anything else. And sure, there's I want to group them all together, because some of them definitely were like, hey, wait a second, I'm not so sure about this. But then they got in those planes and drove them into our vessels, our ships, because they were just totally brainwashed. And that's how moldable kids are. And so when you take a freaking 11-year-old girl and you start down this path, and that's all she's hearing, and that's all the support she's getting. Because look, being a kid, when I wrote my first kids book, one of the things I had to put in perspective was that, I was when I was in the military, my kids were growing up. Part of my mind would be like, what are these kids talking about? Like, nothing matters. Billy called me called me a jerk, and I'm like, so what, right? I'm like, hey, I'm going to Iraq. What, are you kidding me? Yeah. I got buddies that died face down in the mud, so you could be called a jerk by your friend. It's freedom of speech. You know what I mean? Like, that's how detached you get. You forget that when you're a kid, that's your whole world.
Yeah.
School is your whole world. The bully is your whole world. And so what happens when these kids get a world put around them that only has one point of view and it's pushing in one direction, it's no surprise at all that they end up believing what they're hearing from everybody, and everyone's so supportive.
And that affirmation, and it has, and there's no mistake for the radical increase in numbers of young kids who are now saying, well, I'm trans, or I'm, anywhere on the spectrum of the LGBTQ stuff. It's not like been inching, it's like by hundreds of % increasing, to the point where, and I've talked with teachers who say, like, yeah, of all the kids in my class, there's maybe 2 who don't consider themselves LGBTQ something. And so it's kind of become like, and Abigail Schreier writes about this in her books about how kids are being influenced by this. It's peer pressure. It's what's like, are you cool? Or are you boring? Or all this other stuff. And
I'm over here like, bring back Metallica. Let's just go with that. Let's bang heads and grow long hair. That seems like a lot safer of a thing. The other piece that you mentioned that is really disturbing. So you can't ask questions about this. So I obviously work with a lot of companies talking about leadership, and one of the things I talk about when it comes to leadership is if you're working for me and I present a plan and you ask questions, I should be totally open to answering your questions.
Right.
Your questions hopefully are challenging to me, and they make me really think through my idea, and they pressure test my idea, and I'm happy to answer them. And the minute I say, shut up, Tulsi, I don't want to hear more questions, just do what I say, I just lost the argument. Yeah. I just lost leadership capital, because it means I couldn't actually articulate why we're going to do something a certain way. And it also means that I couldn't open my mind enough to say, Tulsi's got a good point. I should incorporate that into the plan, or maybe adjust my plan, or maybe abandon my plan because Tulsi has a really good thought process about this that I didn't think of. But the minute I say, you know what, just be quiet, no more questions, you do what I say.
Exactly.
That means there's something wrong.
It exposes your weakness.
Right. So if you have a question for me and my answer is you're transphobic, that's not a great answer.
No.
That's not a great answer. And look, could it be true? Could I be a person that, I'm scared of transphobic people? Sure. Well, let me think through it then. What am I scared of? Okay, let's have a conversation about that. So, but instead just to be like, no, I don't want to hear any more of your questions. Mm-hmm. This is a problem, and it doesn't lead to a situation where we make progress and where we can actually agree upon anything.
That's right.
So how's the leadership, the governmental leadership, when you talk about the governmental leadership kind of helping push this type of agenda, what does that look like?
Well, it's exactly what you're talking about. The choice to ridicule, discredit, smear, and censor through, partners in big tech, Google, Facebook, all of that, rather than actually have a conversation based on substance. That's having this fear, this self-censoring effect on people, where they're too afraid to even ask questions. They're too afraid to state their own views or opinions or even their own experiences on this. Have you had Kristen Beck on your podcast?
I have not.
I think I heard her talking on Rogan, but Kristen Beck has had similar experiences, even as a trans adult person, saying, well, I don't know, like, this is really dangerous for kids. Like, this is a decision. If people want to make this decision as adults, this is a free country, and you have the freedom to do that and live with whatever the outcomes of that decision may be. But for this to be happening to kids, and Beck has received extremely negative consequences, both on social media and in society, because of stating that fact. The government is pushing this under the guise of something they call gender affirming care, which sounds like something everyone should be for, right? We want to care for and respect each other just as people. But what they're doing is actually abuse of kids. Chloe Cole's story is not a rare case. There are many others, both documented, but also those that haven't been reported, of kids who have gone through or going through exactly what she's been through. She started an organization to be able to reach out to and help provide support to other kids who've gone through the path that she has walked down. The government factor is they're saying that if you as parents don't provide gender affirming care, then Child Protective Services may come in and intervene in order to ensure that your child receives that care elsewhere. They are using this gender affirming care when it comes to federal funding. So for schools, for example, who the government says refuse to provide this quote unquote gender affirming care, which may come in the form of like, okay, not allowing boys to go into the girls' locker room. Boys who say, well, I identify as a girl. If a publicly funded school does not allow that to happen, the federal government says, okay, we are not going to provide you with federal funding for what they call free and reduced lunch for kids who are at a certain low level in the poverty scale. You get free and reduced lunch at schools. The government says if your school does not provide this gender affirming care by allowing boys to go into the girls' locker room, boys who say they're a girl, then we're going to take that money away from you. Who hurts? Who's harmed in that scenario, which is actually happening? It's kids who are hungry who can't afford to buy their own lunch at school. And so, there's so many examples of this where their hypocrisy is just playing out literally in real time. Their hypocrisy of saying, well, hey, this year, 2022, is the 50th anniversary of the enactment of Title IX. The law that was put in place literally out of a recognition of the biological difference between the male and female sex, and to make sure that there was a level playing field. Because kids like your daughter, back in the day, they didn't have the opportunity to get on a girls' wrestling team because they didn't exist in schools. And with most sports, it was like, okay, well, there's boys' sports and there's girls' cheerleading. That was kind of, or like my mom, she did water ballet, and my mom's pretty athletic, but her options were pretty limited as a kid growing up in East Grand Rapids in Michigan. So Title IX, 50 years later, has created huge opportunities for girls and women in sports, which then leads to opportunities in different professions and so on in their life. On this anniversary, 50th anniversary of Title IX, now the government and this administration is trying to, or they are actually redefining Title IX in the law, not by passing an amendment through Congress, but instead backdooring it through a rule change to now include this gender identity, which basically says, like, anybody who says they are a woman can be a woman at any given point in time. And therefore, by doing so, doing two things: erasing women as a group in society, because now you could, if you wake up tomorrow, you're like, yeah, I'm a woman. All right, well, the government says now you are the same protected class as a biological woman, as me. But the deeper kind of underlying danger goes back to where we started, is this change is our government saying there is no such thing as objective truth. There is no such thing as biology. There is no such thing as this biological difference between a male and female. And if we, as a society, accept this premise, then where are the boundaries? There literally are no boundaries. And where does this lead? I mean, I've talked about this before. You would think that kids are the one place where everyone in our society can agree, like, kids are the most vulnerable. We have to protect our kids. Well, now it is starting to become acceptable to use this term minor attracted person, which is a pedophile. It's a pedophile. And yet you have teachers.
That's the Overton window expanding.
Exactly. Right? That's what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. And so people are like, oh yeah, we should just like let people be who they want to be, and kids and this and that. Like, okay, so if you deny
that's where
the
that
existence,
shut up comes in, right? You should be like, hey, no, shut up.
You're not allowed to say that. A few extra words there.
Yeah, exactly.
Seriously. And then you have people who are teachers in a position to care for our kids on social media. They're like, yeah, I'm a minor attracted person, and this is how I feel when I'm standing in front of the classroom and using this very sexually explicit language. And parents are giving their children over to these people for more hours, waking hours of the day, probably than they're able to spend time with their kids. And if you become a bigot if you're like, yeah, no, this is not okay. This normalization of pedophilia is exactly what's happening right now. How does it happen? Where does it start? Going back to where you started, well, you look at each, how this Overton window is opening and pushing you not just to respect someone's different choices, but to openly accept and champion these things that are literally insane and are causing direct harm to our kids. And again, this is where the societal shift and change, this cancel culture, this fear-mongering, pushing self-censorship, coupled with the power of government, both directly and indirectly through big tech, has put us in a very dangerous place in our society.
How much did you see with big tech collusion with the government when you were in the government?
Quite a bit, especially when I ran for president. I don't know, I could probably think of a number of reasons why it escalated so quickly there, where, it got to a point where even as I was, being very outspoken on different issues beforehand, I think certain powers that be maybe didn't think that, she's just saying her piece, she's over here on the sidelines. But, running for president provides a certain platform. And it was, the first kind of eye-opening experience to me was when we had the very first presidential debate in the Democratic primaries. It was in 2019. Most people in the country didn't know who I was, had never heard of me before, and my hope was, all right, cool, there'll be millions of people watching, and I think there were north of 20 million people who tuned into that first debate. Maybe a little off, but ballpark. And my hope is I'll be able to introduce myself, let people know why I'm offering to serve as president and commander-in-chief, and then, they'll go online and say, okay, cool, I want to learn more. We set up all of our Google AdSense accounts in the hopes that they would do so and that I would be able to have my website there ahead of whatever stuff Google chose to push on people. I was the most searched candidate of the night after that debate, which we had hoped would be the case. And all of a sudden, our Google ad account was suspended with no explanation, no notice, no message, like literally nothing, just crickets. And so our team immediately obviously started to reach out like, hey, what's going on here? We set this up according to all the rules and da-da-da. We tested it beforehand. Everything was good. What happened? No response. And this went on for a period of time. And then all of a sudden, we still never got a response. Then all of a sudden, the account the suspension was taken off the account. And that was the first glaring example directly that I felt.
What part of your mind was like, oh, dang, that's too bad. I can't believe this weird thing happened. And what part of your mind was like, these bastards?
These bastards.
Did it go straight to these bastards?
I went straight there because it was.
Were you suspect already going into it? Or is that just like a total eye opener?
No, I mean, I had, the influence and impact of these big tech companies and social media was already pretty clear. How their algorithms were trying to push certain kinds of information to invoke a certain response from their users. I think things were becoming more and more clear just broadly at that point, which is why when that happened, it was way too much of a coincidence to just be a coincidence. I ultimately filed a lawsuit against Google because of this to make the point and to make the statement that they shouldn't be allowed to get away with this. People need to know how much power a monopoly like Google has on directly influencing, interfering in our elections. And that if they can do this to a sitting member of Congress running for the highest office in the land, making it so that they are manipulating and dictating what information people see when they type in, who is Tulsi Gabbard, they can do it to anyone for any reason. Whether you're running for mayor or dog catcher or whatever it might be, that this private corporation gets to determine what we as voters know and see and hear about a person. And that became increasingly clear throughout my entire campaign, how, the power elite, as I call them, or the permanent Washington, that these are made up of some of the most powerful people in politics, the most powerful people in corporate media, and the most powerful people in big tech, are interfering in our elections by dictating who voters are exposed to and what they are exposed to about certain people who are running for office. They decide what the narrative is. And so to say, and this is the thing, of course, they don't talk about when they talk about, influence and interference in our democracy and our elections, but it is the biggest and most impactful thing that is influencing voters. And there have been recent cases that have come forward about Google, for example, like in this past election, there was a report that was done showing that political emails from candidates going into Gmail accounts, which most people have, favored sending these favored progressive or Democrat candidates or Democrat messaging to funnel those emails into your inbox, whereas conservative or Republican political emails were more than 50% of the time end up in your spam box. So, there are a lot of different examples of this, but it's a dangerous thing that is now going unchecked. There's no check and balance on that. And then you look at, so what are the political leanings of these big tech companies? And Facebook has obviously, they've been in the news a lot about this as well. they have a specific political slant. But to me, whether the political slant is to the left or to the right, or if it's Democrat versus Republican, if we don't, number one, if we're not informed about it, not calling it out, and not pushing our lawmakers to say, hey, this, we have to call it for what it is. They're directly trying to influence our elections. We have to be willing to do it, whoever is, whatever their political slant is. The point is, like, freedom of speech is freedom of speech. We have to be willing to protect that freedom of speech, no matter whether we like it or not, or whether we agree with that speech or not.
I guess the live experiment's going on right now with Twitter, right?
Yes.
With Elon.
Yes.
And what he's doing. And he's bringing back all these people that were banned, including Donald Trump. He just brought back Donald Trump. I don't think Donald Trump has gone on and gone back to Twitter yet. And apparently he has some kind of commitment to to the Truth, which is another social media platform. Truth Media, Truth what is it called?
Social.
Truth Social.
Yeah.
So, but Elon's let everybody on except for Alex Jones. Alex Jones, he did not let on what Echo. You're laughing at that. Finally got some reaction out of Echo Charles. Yay, nay, Alex Jones.
Yes, that's funny to me, but I don't know.
Okay.
He's going through a lot of legal situations right now.
Yeah, what he's owes billions of dollars apparently, right? Billions of dollars to the parents of the Sandy Hook massacre. But so other than Alex Jones, it looks like Elon and Twitter is just going wide open.
Yeah.
I think it's literally other than Alex Jones.
What's interesting to me about that is the people who are publicizing that they're leaving because now, as Elon said, he's a free speech absolutist.
Which, can you say that if you don't bring Alex Jones back on?
I don't know.
Can you? Is that an absolutist?
Technically, that's not absolute.
Okay,
but,
so he's almost an absolutist.
Almost reasonably absolute.
I saw the other day that CBS News, what is it? They like, oh, we're leaving Twitter, and then was it like a day or two, and then they came back.
They came back. Fox News left Twitter for a long time.
Is that right? I didn't know that.
They left Twitter for months and months and months. They left Twitter and they stayed off. And I forget what brought them back on, but you have this experiment kind of with Elon Musk right now, opening up Twitter, and I guess we'll see what happens. And I mean, the whole thing, it's just such drama. And that's one thing that's interesting. I always feel like all this stuff that we're talking about is like a separate world that I'm actually not that, I don't get fully engaged in that world, because I actually have a bunch of businesses and like things going on. And I feel like that's more normal. And if you're not careful, you think that this world that we're talking about, the world of social media, the world of Twitter, the world of Facebook, the world of Instagram, if you're not careful, you think that's real.
Yeah. And
you have to remember that it's not real.
Yeah.
And that it's just a virtual world that's not real. But there's people that live and die in that world. And that world drives them crazy, by the way. I got asked that on a podcast interview a little while ago, well, how do you feel when people make bad comments about you on Twitter or on, and I said, hey, I recommend you don't really get concerned about those things, because it's a bot, right? It's a bot, or it's a person that's just looking, it's a troll or a bot. That's pretty much what percentage of negative comments are coming from a person that is making a negative comment because their goal is to help influence you and move you in a better direction and see their perspective. The chances of that are very few. It's a bot or it's a troll. So why are you getting spun up about this stuff?
I was in Greensboro, North Carolina a few days ago. Stopped in a little shop on the side of the road, and this guy comes up to me, and he's like, "Oh my God, are you Tulsi freaking Gabbard?" It's like, "Yeah." It's like, "What are you doing here? There's nothing in Greensboro." It's like, "Oh, I'm here for this event I'll be speaking at later on." And he's like, "You know what? If I was on Twitter right now, I would be putting out a tweet saying how much I don't like Tulsi Gabbard. But now you're standing right in front of me and I can't freaking say that. Like, you're a real person." And, I ended up talking to him for about 5 minutes or so. And he's like, "I got to take a picture." I was like, "All right, if you post it on Twitter, you better be true to your word here, buddy, and not start talking shit about me." But it was just funny, the interaction, which is exactly that. Like, in real life, very rarely. I've actually had it happen a couple of times where people will come up and say the kinds of harsh, mean criticisms that they say on Twitter, maybe all the time. But by and large, most people, they wouldn't have that kind of interaction with someone in real life.
Mm-hmm. What was the guy's beef with you? Or what do you suspect it would have been?
I don't know. It was interesting because after he said that, he's like, all right, can I just ask you one question? I was like, yeah, like my ride's waiting outside. I don't have a lot of time. But he's like, you say a lot of things that are pretty critical of the Democratic Party, and I agree with a lot of those things, but why are you still a Democrat? I'm like, oh, I'm not. He's like, oh, you're not? It's like, no, go listen to episode 1 of my podcast, and there's 29 minutes of me telling you exactly why I left the Democrat Party. But then that was it. And then he's like, oh my gosh, like, okay, I'm going to go and listen to that. And then he asked if he could take a picture. And then as I was walking out, there were people sitting next to me. I was like, is that Tulsi Gabbard? I was like, yeah. Oh. Anyways, it was just funny because I don't know that he knew exactly what his beef was. But for whatever reason, he was not positively disposed towards me. But then after 4 minutes of a conversation, and just recognizing like, hey, yeah, I'm a real person. You're a real person. And maybe we don't agree on everything. Probably don't. Disagree on some things. Cool. That's fine. But, let's just treat each other with respect.
Yeah. What's scary about that is someone that's just like, I don't like you and I have beef with you, and if I was on Twitter, I'd be talking smack.
Yeah.
And the main reason is because that you've been labeled as a Democrat, and so they're not a Democrat, so therefore they must hate you.
Right.
And that's the horrible thing, right? Because, someone can be anything, and if you have an open mind and listen to what they have to say, you go, oh, well, they got some good points there, and that really doesn't make any sense to me right now, but let's hear what their perspective is, and that's a good way to like survive and live with other human beings in the world. Yeah. Listen to what they have to say, maybe try and see their perspective a little bit, which it just seems like is very limited, especially in the world of social media.
Yeah. And this goes to, one of the this is something that I talked about in my statement about why I left the Democrat Party, is how divided our country has become largely because of those, well, if you are white, therefore you are this. If you are black, therefore you are that. And how the Democratic Party has completely gone against Dr. King's dream of this, that his kids would one day grow up in a society where we're judged based on our character, not the color of our skin. Well, now, even in our schools, the elementary schools, they want our kids to be taught that if you're white, you're privileged. If you are a person of color, then you are the oppressed or you are the victim. And dividing us based on the color of our skin and racializing everything in our society. If something happens, well, obviously it's because of race. Obviously it's because of the color of your skin. And you can go down that path of these broad categorizations, whether it's based on party politics or race, ethnicity, religion, any of these boxes that they like to put us in and use as wedges to drive us apart, rather than, again, focus like, all right, let's just go below the surface and recognize that, all people from Hawaii are not the same. Or, whatever the fill in the blank is. We get into dangerous territory when we judge each other just based on, the superficial or the label that is attached to us. And I've been on the receiving end of this constantly, because I've never fit into any one of those specific boxes. And, friends of mine say, well, that hurts you politically because then you don't have like that natural support base. But, none of us as people are monoliths. None of us are just walking around as like, oh, these labels are attached to me, therefore I am that. And assuming that in our society has the negative effect of not encouraging that critical thinking, that independent thought, that healthy skepticism of like, all right, when I read this story or I hear this view, where are they coming from? What's the angle on it? What's their experience maybe that's informed that may be different from my own? And what can I learn from it? Or maybe I end up disagreeing with it. But I've thought through, here are the reasons why, not just because like, oh, that person is in this category or this group, therefore I must disagree. I must be opposed. And that's it has the opposite effect of, I think, the foundation of this country, which is we are all Americans. Out of many, there are one. And this kind of individual thought and freedom of expression was celebrated at one time in this country. And now, worse than not being celebrated, there are punitive effects and consequences to that freedom of expression, to where it becomes freedom of expression. You know, for those in power, freedom of expression is only celebrated if they agree with it.
Imagine being the adversary of America, like you're China right now, and you're just sitting there watching this unfold. And there's no better way to destroy your adversary than to have them destroy themselves. And so it's no surprise when, you know, the Russian bot farms were setting up these counter protests and protests in the same neighborhoods, and really just doing all they could to divide America. And that's why I always try and keep that top of mind for myself. When I get put into a scenario where someone's trying to, you know, frame me up mentally, I'm always thinking to myself, okay, well, hold on a second. Don't get framed up mentally. Listen to what someone else has to say. See what their perspective is. And remember that they're American and I'm an American. Because if I'm an American and you're American, cool. We got all kinds of things in common. I think I said this on this podcast before. Unless you're an actual ISIS member, we're gonna find some common ground. Like, we're gonna both like UFC, or we're gonna both like guitar. Like, there's gonna be something there. We're gonna both like Led Zeppelin or whatever. There's gonna be something there where we go, oh, okay, cool. I'm down. You know, oh, you listen to Led Zeppelin, cool. What's your favorite album? Like, let's go. But it's really easy to just focus on, oh, you like this and I don't like that, therefore you're my enemy and we should fight, which is really, really freaking lame. It's really lame. And that's where we get framed up all day long. And social media is the amplifier of that we've never seen before.
Truly.
Never seen before. I think it would clean up a lot on Twitter if you were only allowed to be you. You're only allowed to have your name.
Yeah, I agree with that.
You
can't hide behind.
Isn't that kind of what Facebook does? Facebook does that, right? Can you be on Facebook and be like, you know, Alpha 29474 and make a bunch of comments? Echo Charles, expert.
That's not a yes or no question. You kind of can't. You could probably get away with it to a degree.
False name, right?
Yeah, false name. Or because I see people with that
on Facebook.
Sure. Yeah. With something other than their real name. Yes.
So maybe if you're going to make
which
comments,
is like the catfishing, right? Like they find like pictures of.
Well, that depends. If they're trying to misrepresent their identity,
that's true.
But
to take advantage of someone else,
you know, that's like an alias, nickname, you know, that kind of stuff. I see that for sure.
Yeah.
But I don't think Facebook is like openly permissive about it. I think it's like they try to make you have your real name. It seems like it.
It seems to me when I look at Facebook comments, they're people.
Yes. Yeah.
Twitter comments, maybe not so much.
Twitter
comments, YouTube totally not.
No.
YouTube fully not. And the divisiveness, people talk. This is another thing that I find interesting is people talk about it's never been more divisive than it is now. And I get it. We want to make headlines, but man, we had a literal civil war where 650,000 people died. 650,000 people died. Right. And even in the late 60s, early 70s, there was crazy civil unrest. And there was, you know, the Sudanese Liberation Army and the Black Liberation Army and the Black Panthers and the Weather Underground. And these were groups that were killing, like there was like something like 35 police officers that were assassinated. There was bombings. Bombings happened so much in those days that it almost didn't even make the headline of the news. I mean, if someone puts a bomb off today in America, that's going to be in the front of every news story there, every news corporation there is. Back in the late 60s, early 70s, that stuff was just happening. They were just blowing stuff up. So It's not as bad. It's not the worst it's ever been, but it certainly seems that way when you go on social media and you start paying attention to that mayhem.
Yeah, it's true. And you know, I don't know what the recent numbers, but I feel like Twitter, you might know this, Echo, but Twitter, I think, is
Echo
like...
just became
expert.
became the expert. I guess compared to me and Tulsi,
you're
an
the tech
expert.
guy. But it's something like less than 5% of Americans are on Twitter. It's a really
It's
a surprisingly low number. But you look at it is known as the place for people in politics and the media. And so when you look at the outsized influence, you know, like a tweet can make a news story. It's not representative of, you know, the vast majority of Americans in this country.
Yeah.
But it has an outsized effect.
It does have an outside effect, and I think that is safe to say. Most people aren't spending. I had this conversation with Ben Shapiro. You know, he was talking about all this stuff, and I said, "Hey Ben, you're at ground zero for like political controversy and mayhem." And most people in America are just like working their job, going to their kids' jiu-jitsu tournament, wrestling tournament, piano recital. That's what most people are doing. Now, if you want to open up that app and just let it creep into your brain, it's going to get in there for sure.
Yeah. I had to take, during when I was running for president, my husband, like he doesn't like politics, and he's not a social media guy at all. But he was starting to look at Twitter a lot, and it got to the point where he was like actually first of all, he's like, who is this person? Where are they? Where do they live? But I remember, like, we were sitting in like an Olive Garden for dinner, probably in New Hampshire somewhere, and he was glued to his phone, and I could like almost palpably feel his blood pressure rising, and you know, his like stress and anxiety and anger and just all of these emotions. And there was a few times I literally had to physically pull his phone from his hand, and then he ultimately just deleted the app because, you know, this is not a world that he lives in. I've been used to all kinds of attacks for a really long time, but it has, I mean, for you can understand that for people who aren't accustomed to that sort of thing, it can have a really, really negative emotional impact.
Oh yeah, you know, we had one of my buddies, Micah Fink, who runs an awesome organization helping vets, but he said something when he was on the podcast about, like, you are giving the energy to the thing that's eating you.
Exactly.
So like your husband just going, oh, you know what, I've had enough of this, delete.
Yeah.
That, and one of our friends, Jack Daniel Hill, just went on like a retreat into the mountains, and I was like, oh, how was it? And, you know, just talking to him. And the first thing he goes, it was 4 days, no phone, no watch, didn't even know what time it was. And he said when he got back, he said it was such a good like dopamine reset, because you realize what that phone does to you, like how it makes you feel. You know, it's like I talk about fasting from food, and one of the best things you get from a food fast is it recalibrates your hunger, right? Like you think, like, it's been 2 hours, dude, I'm starving. I'm starving. You're like, you're an idiot, right? And then you get done with like a fast, a 3-day fast, and you're like, I'm not even close to hungry. I'm fine. And so the dopamine hit on the phone is the same thing. Like you take a break from that thing, and you go, oh, this thing is running my brain. Yeah. It's got ownership of my brain. You can't let that happen.
Yeah. And you don't even realize it. That documentary Social Dilemma was very eye-opening in how intentional, completely intentional.
Oh, totally.
Like they're looking for that exact effect. Oh, completely. Like the smallest, littlest things, like opportunity for exploitation, left, right, and center, and it's constant. And it's I used to wear an Apple Watch, and I don't anymore, specifically because, like, I don't need that.
Bing,
constantly.
You know, that's the other weird thing is, like, on Twitter, obviously, and look, I like Twitter. And what I like about Twitter is it's fun, because it's basically, for lack of a better word, personality, you get to sit there and make one-liners. Yeah. It's basically just one-liners. And it's easier than the one-liners if you and I are talking, because if you and I are talking, I have to do a one-liner on the spot. I have 1 second to think about it. I got to do it.
Yeah.
With Twitter, I can take 7 minutes to think of a really good one-liner, right? So of course you're going to win. Of course you're going to you're going to sound funny or whatever. And it's a fun thing to do. But man, sometimes I'll like read someone that's putting something on Twitter, and you can see that they're putting some little fraction of their soul into it. Maybe that's a strong word, but they're putting at least some level of effort of like, hey, I want to make this point. People have to hear this.
Yeah.
What I'm about to say is going to have impact. And I'm thinking, I'm sorry, man, but like, if you're looking to change the world, you shouldn't be trying to change the world on Twitter. You should be trying to change the world through some other things. Start a business, grow a company, go out and talk to people and communicate with them in a broad, long-term format. But to sit there and be like, all right, this is the thread. This is the thread that's really going to change things up. This is the one. So I think that's a little bit sketchy, and you have to watch out for that. And again, I also think that Twitter originally as a method of communication, when I originally got on it, Tim Ferriss, he says to me, oh no, it's a really good way to like talk to people and communicate with them. And you can get a bunch of information. I was like, oh, I guess that sounds cool. And at some point, Twitter went from a way to communicate with a bunch of people and have them communicate back to you and people you don't know, and it's all good. And we can all, it went from that sort of a positive communication. And I still think, I still feel that way about it. Like I'll go on, have all kinds of positive, really good interactions with people. I'm probably the only person that's just on there trying to having a bunch of positive interactions. Even when people say negative stuff to me on Twitter, I always say, oh, that's a cool perspective. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Like, well, that makes sense. I never thought of it that way. And let me keep an open mind here instead of just going on the attack. But yeah, people got to watch out for that one.
Yeah. So my approach is a little different than yours. I am, and social media strategists may have some constructive feedback here, but I do try to be pretty intentional about things that I put out on social media at large. But Twitter, limitation of space. I put some thought into the statements that I'm making, in the hope that it will have an impact, at least causing people to ask a question or maybe stop and think about whatever the topic is that I'm commenting on, and using it as a platform to help inform and engage on the issues of the day. It's challenging because it's so short, but to me, all of these different platforms, yes, there's positives and negatives to them. So I want to try to, I want to be very intentional about what I am putting out. Responses, cross the spectrum. But to me, this is like really the thing is like people are like, oh, I always laugh at the comments that are like, oh, I hate what you say, or you're so ignorant, or you're terrible. All of these different things. Like, dude, unfollow. It's as simple as that. Or you should not be allowed to speak, and da-da-da-da-da-da. Unfollow. And that's where like you see how, again, people in government and people in positions of power are like, well, we need to ban hate speech. We need to ban misinformation and disinformation. Who gets to decide what that is? What Echo might think is hate speech may be different from what you might consider hate speech. What's offensive to him might be different than what's offensive to you. We saw this through the COVID pandemic, right? One day, Dr. Fauci says, oh, masks are useless, don't go buy them. Then the next day he's like, well, actually, everybody really has to wear a mask. Like, okay, so who gets to say what is misinformation and disinformation and what should be banned versus not banned?
The post-mortem on the COVID is very crazy to look at.
Yeah. It's a great case study for what we're talking about.
The last time you were here, you didn't do a podcast, but you were in town, and Echo and I were here, and you just were like, hey, I'm in town, swing by. And so you were here. Echo and I were like way beyond COVID. I guess we were just like not wearing masks, not doing anything. You were here. You were still in Congress.
Yep.
You were here. You had 2 masks on.
Yep.
I ended up having to send you the horrible text of like, hey, I'm really sorry, but both Echo and I have COVID after you left. But when you look back, what do you think of that whole gig, that whole COVID thing? Like, it was mayhem.
It was mayhem, and a lot of it was caused by a lot of. Fauci was lying about masks because he didn't want people to go buy masks because he felt like there wasn't enough masks for healthcare professionals. Mm-hmm. And I think at different points, you saw how you're not allowed to go to church, not allowed to go to a funeral, you're not allowed to have a wedding, you're not allowed to gather with friends in your house, not allowed to have birthday parties, but
you can go to Home Depot, Walmart, and McDonald's.
Home Depot, Walmart, McDonald's, or 50,000 people in a Black Lives Matter march, shoulder to shoulder,
Screaming.
social distancing, 6 feet apart. Like, no. And just the direct statements that these so-called healthcare professionals made during that time was like, oh, well, the cause is worthy, so therefore it outweighs the risk of COVID. But your kids are not allowed to go to school. My whole perspective on this is individual choice. And so for me, like, I travel a lot, I do a lot, I don't want to get sick. I was wearing masks on planes before COVID happened because I can't afford to have days out where I can't do what I need to do, whether that was in Congress or now. I have people in my family who have compromised immune system. So generally, I am more careful than your average person because I can't afford to get sick. But it comes down to the idea of individual choice was thrown out the window, and we saw how people in power were claiming to act in the best interest of quote unquote public health, but it really got to a point where this was about compliance or face the consequences. It became about power, and that's the dangerous thing as we look back at what happened.
How much did government trust decay because of COVID?
How much did government trust what?
Decay.
What do you mean?
I mean, people that maybe before COVID would be like, government's saying something. It's,
government,
it's the government.
Yeah, decaying trust in the government. Yeah, exactly. I think that lack of trust went up dramatically because, God, what was it? One of these mainstream media, I don't know if it's the New York Times, New Yorker, one of these had an op-ed recently published where they're just like, oh, people should just forgive people like Dr. Fauci for being wrong because, hey, nobody really knew what was going on. And a lot of parents being like, hold on a second, my kid was out of school for 2 years and you want us to just forgive and forget as my kid's trying to, play catch up or just whatever, again, like I've families who could not go and see a loved one in the hospital before they died. There's not a whole lot of forgive and forget, I think, going on by people who really were, small business owners who were forced out of business. And there's just so many different examples.
From a leadership perspective, you have to be honest with people about what you know and what you don't know and what's like your best guess and look, it never inspires confidence, right? If we're in combat and I say, hey, Tulsi, I guess you should move to that next building, right? Like that doesn't inspire the kind of confidence that people want to hear.
Yeah.
But if you and I are working together and you know that, listen, all leadership decisions are a guess. They really are. Mm-hmm. You're not making any leadership decisions that I know 100%, very few. Let me rephrase that. Very few leadership decisions that you make as a human being in a leadership position, you know 100% what's going to happen. And if you did, then who cares, right? If I know 100%, I know 100% if we make this investment, we will 100%. That's not even a decision, right? That's just a smart move that you're going to make.
Yeah.
If I knew on the battlefield 100%, if you take down this building, we're going to get the flank on the enemy and not lose anybody.
Right.
Great. That's just a move,
Fact.
Right?
Right.
But when it comes to making decisions, you gotta recognize, number one, that, hey, this is a guess that I'm making right now based on the information that I have. And when more information comes out, I'm probably going to have to make adjustments to what I said 15 minutes ago, 15 days ago, 15 weeks ago, or whatever. Mm-hmm. And yet it seemed like people's egos were so fragile that they just dug in and just
even when it made no sense
anymore. Even when it made, after they had the freaking Super Bowl in Los Angeles with how many people were there? Echo Charles.
I don't know.
80,000 or something like this. And they're all in there. And then in LA at that time, I had gone to LA for something. It was full on, like everyone's wearing a mask. And then they had the Super Bowl and no one's wearing a mask. And then they go back and it's like, it didn't make sense. Yeah. And no one said, hey, you know what we thought a month ago, 2 months ago, whatever, we've adjusted what we were thinking because we might have been wrong about that.
Yeah.
And here's what we're thinking now. This is our best guess. This is how we're going to move forward. None of that happened. It was freaking ridiculous.
And the crazy thing is, like, you know, as someone who has, you know, especially in the military, but in politics, been exposed to good leaders and you know, bad leaders. What I would hope from someone in a leadership position is just that honesty and transparency. Say, hey, here's the decision that we made based on the information that we had. We have new information, and so here's the guidance, or here's the direction that we're headed. Like, that would engender more trust and more respect to those in positions of power and leadership, rather than exactly what you're saying we saw, where they were more concerned about not admitting, like, hey, we got that one a little wrong. We're going to adjust and kind of course correct. They're more concerned about that than they were about actually doing what was right and what was best, and not concerned for the consequences, more concerned for themselves and how people might perceive them.
Yeah, and that's what's weird is everybody knows. I asked hundreds of people this question when I talk about leadership. Like, if I go to you and I say, hey, Tulsi, I'm not really sure how to conduct this mission. What do you think we should do?
Yeah.
Everybody knows that that's a better attitude and better leadership than if I'm not really sure how to conduct an operation. I say, all right, Tulsi, here's how we're doing it. And this is what we're going to do because I said so. Everybody knows that the first leader that asks for input and has an open mind, everybody knows that leader's more respected. Mm-hmm. Everybody knows that. And yet, when we're in the leadership position, we decide to think, you know what? Everyone's going to think I don't know what I'm doing if I ask Tulsi what her opinion is. It's freaking totally ridiculous. Exactly. And it's totally wrong. And yet it's our ego. Our ego is so strong that it overpowers our actual knowledge of what good leadership is. We all know the better leader says, hey, you know, I've never conducted an operation like this before. Tulsi, I know you have. How do you think we should do it? Everybody knows that that's better leadership than Tulsi's got a bunch of experience in this type of operation. I've never done it before, but I don't want to look bad, so I'm going to dictate how we're doing it. Everybody knows that that's bad.
Yeah.
And yet our ego pushes us to do that. It's ridiculous. That's how strong the ego is.
One of my favorite series of all times is Band of Brothers. And it was something that I first learned about as an E. I'd just gotten into the Army National Guard. We did our annual training at Fort Indiantown Gap in Pennsylvania. And I had happened to pick up the book Band of Brothers by Dick Winters as we were out there, was reading it, was on the plane going back to Hawaii when I finished it. And in the very back of the book, it says, you know, Dick Winters has now retired and is residing in Fort Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania. I was like, oh my God, I would have loved to go knock on that guy's door.
Yeah, for sure.
That would have been incredible. But I've watched that series so many times. In OCS, we watched episode by episode, and we had to write essays on each episode talking about leadership lessons. Mm-hmm. And for those who've seen it, the Captain Sobel character, who was Ross from Friends. Yeah. He is that guy. He's that guy who was totally driven by ego, did not care about what was right or drawing from experience or anything else. He was right to a fault, and his soldiers suffered, and they lacked any respect for him, like blatantly saluted the rank solely, but that was it. Like, following him into combat terrified them, and they talked about this and raised this through their chain of command, versus Dick Winters, the guy who really represented and embodied the characteristics of servant leadership and humility, and, you know, drawing on the strengths of his NCOs and his men to be able to make sure that they were taking care of each other and accomplishing the mission.
Yeah, at Echelon Front, we do that. We actually take chunks of Band of Brothers and talk about it. And again, everybody knows that Captain Sobel is hated. Yep. And everybody knows that when you try and demand respect from people, it doesn't work. Everybody knows that, and yet people freaking do it. At Echelon Front, my leadership company wouldn't exist if people could just kind of execute innately on what they know. Yeah. But that ego is so strong that it just overpowers the ability to listen to what other people have to say. It overpowers the ability to allow themselves to be influenced by what other people are saying. Mm-hmm. They think of that as weakness. Mm-hmm. If you say, hey, Jocko, I think we should attack this target from the north instead of from the west, and in my mind, I think, wait a second, I'm going to look weak if I accept Tulsi's input right now. So no. Right. Our ego just drives us. And this is, again, I think this is one of the major issues that we see in America is that a lot of times people think, I'm going to look weak if I do this. I'm going to look bad, or I don't want to submit. I don't want to subordinate my ego. I don't want Tulsi to be the one that had the good idea, so I'm not going to use her idea. I'd rather just fail. Isn't it crazy? It happens in business a lot where I come up with the idea, my idea is not working, but it was my idea, so I'm just going to lose. I'm going to go bankrupt. And people think, no one would do that. Oh, yes, they will, and they do. And the extreme example is combat. There's plenty of historical examples where people have gotten their troops killed, and in some cases gotten themselves killed because they just didn't want to say, you know what, I was wrong about this. We shouldn't attack. We shouldn't do a frontal assault right now. We should actually take a step back, maybe retreat a little bit, and come and attack a different way. There's plenty of examples in history where people die because their ego gets in the way. So it happens in business. And if it can happen in business and people can bankrupt a company, and it can happen in battle and people can get people killed, it will certainly happen all day on Twitter where people say, I would rather just perish than admit that, oh, that's a good point. I didn't think through that.
And obviously it happens in politics every single day.
Oh, yeah.
And I think the interesting thing about that is these are decisions that are made out of fear. Their motivation is fear, ultimately, is themselves looking stupid or silly or not getting the credit or whatever it is. And I could, examples day and night, I could tell you in politics, how people who are elected into these positions of leadership are really followers who are looking to react to certain situations, what will put me in the best light, how can I take advantage of this to further myself, or make those decisions based on fear of like, hey, I don't want to stand out from the crowd. I don't want to get this criticism. I don't want to be ostracized by this group or that group. Or what if these people don't like me? Or what if, I don't get the credit for this? And that was, one of the first days that I had as a new member of Congress in Washington. The message from Democratic Party leadership was like, hey, you need to make sure that we as a party get the credit for what you're doing. So if there's a bill with a good idea that one of your Republican colleagues puts forward and they want you to join them on it, don't do it because you'll make them look good. Just take their idea and you introduce the bill so that you and therefore the Democrats get credit for it. And then, and only then, will we advance that idea, because if it's the other guys, then now, we'll just let that bill die silently in the night. And
scum.
If this were just, I don't know, running for class president in high school, that'd be one thing. But then you take this example and you look at people who are making decisions based on our foreign policy and where and when our men and women are sent into combat. And not being willing to say, hey, we got that one wrong, or hey, we need to relook at how we're thinking about this problem set and ask the question, how does this best serve the interest of the United States, our national security, the interest of the American people, instead of like, I got to look tough, I got to be strong, I got to pound my chest. And the unfortunate, and this is why I talk a lot about how the most important responsibility the president has is to serve as commander-in-chief. And the danger of having a weak-minded person in that position who does not understand the seriousness of that job is they feel they have to prove their strength. And what better way to prove that strength than to say, hey, I'm going to go drop some bombs. I'm going to go send in, our meanest, baddest fighters to go into a certain situation or start a war, insert ourselves into a conflict without actually saying, hey, maybe exercising restraint in this situation is actually not only the right move, but it's the power move. It's the move that actually serves the interest of our country. And that's the dangerous consequence of exactly what you're talking about, of ego and leaders making decisions based on emotion and fear rather than actual assessment of, all right, what are we looking at? What are the consequences of course of action A, B, C, and D? And what exactly are we trying to accomplish?
It's freaking depressing. Is there any is there any freaking light at the end of the tunnel for our government?
Yes.
What is it?
Us. The light at the end of the tunnel is people who are frustrated by the status quo, people who are concerned for what kind of future that we want to leave behind for our kids, what kind of country we want them to grow up in. When I say be the change, it's recognize the vision that our founders had for this country, that, literally escaping control and being governed by a monarchy where the people had no say, to forming this country based on the foundation of a self-governed people. And what does that actually mean? What does that look like? It's we the people fulfilling our responsibility in selecting leaders who truly are a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. There's a lot of different ways that any one of us can get involved and be a part of that. But the bare minimum is cast your vote and do a little bit of work, just a little bit, to make sure that the votes that you're casting are based on, informed, figure out what you want. And this is not to say, you'll hear in politics like, oh, one side only wants to get their side out to vote and hopes everybody else stays home. The more we have this open marketplace of ideas, the more we exercise our rights and freedoms and make sure that our voices are heard, then we have the kind of robust democracy that our founders envisioned.
Again, back to the depressing viewpoint over from Jocko, is the game that gets played as far as the whole political system. The game that's getting played is not conducive to people, hey, okay, this is what I'm thinking right now, and this is what my beliefs are, and I'm going to go out and vote, and therefore if a bunch of people are thinking like me, then we'll probably do okay. The game that's being played is like, it's all about how much money can you put into advertising, and how many people can you get to vote, and what methodology is there for voting. I mean, some of the voting things are crazy. Some of the things that happen with voting and the way voting takes place. So it seems like the game that the politicians are playing, there's, that the people are just sort of pawns that are, here's what we're going to do to get the pawns to vote this way, and here's what we'll get the result that we want.
All of that is absolutely true. And knowing that is true, and knowing that that's the case, is so important for us to know as voters what we're being subjected to and why. And is exactly to try to manipulate us to vote in the way that one side or the other wants us to. And knowing that, then we can take a step back and again, encourage that critical thinking, encourage that as you're getting information, whether it's on a television ad or a social media post or a news article, exercise your own discernment and pause for a minute and think about, okay, well, what is their bias? What do they want me to think, or how do they want me to react to this? There's some apps out there. I know there's a bunch. There's one that I have on my phone called All Sides, and it's an app that will present kind of the news headlines of the day, and it'll say, well, this news source is left-leaning, this one is neutral, this one is right-leaning. And it's not foolproof by any means, but there's some quick ways to kind of look out there and get a little bit of an idea of what direction or angle or bias a certain media source is taken, so that okay, well, if I read this, then okay, well, that's kind of the outcome they want me to have. But being aware of that, I think, is the first step. There are a lot of other policy changes that I think need to take place to address some of the problems that we're talking about, but that can only happen when we throw out leaders who are abusing their power and actually start to get real leaders into office who will take us in the right direction.
When you say policy changes to address some of the things that have happened, what do you mean?
I mean, the big tech, I think, is a huge one, that as long as politicians are in the pockets and getting money from the Googles and Metas of the world, we're not going to see those kinds of changes take place. I've heard a lot from both Democrats and Republicans about, big tech monopolies are such a big problem. It's like, yeah, okay, so what are you doing about it? And when you look at it, like, they're not doing anything about it, actually. There's a healthy debate and conversation that needs to be had about how do you, what role does government play in regulating these monopolies? I think first, there's Section 230 within the U.S. Code provides big tech essentially with the legal immunity that a publisher like the New York Times does not have, because originally they thought, okay, well, big tech, like they're not going to be an arbiter and a curator of information. They're just going to be, an online platform. Whereas the New York Times does curate, what letters to the editor they choose to publish or the articles they choose to publish. But in reality, in an application, these big tech monopolies they're curating very, very carefully every single thing that we see. And yet they are not being held legally liable in the same way that a publisher would. So that's kind of basic number one of like, okay, how should they be treated? Some say they should be treated as a utility, much like the phone company, where the phone company doesn't control who calls who or the content of any conversation. They are just a platform for us to be able to communicate and talk to each other. So I think this big tech obviously does not want to lose that legal immunity. If they are a free speech platform, then be a free speech platform. If they're a platform that says, well, we're only going to push these certain viewpoints, then people know that and will know that going in. That's an important place to start, to make it so that these monopolies. I have been a big fan of breaking up big tech, using existing provisions within the law that, like
standard antitrust type stuff.
Exactly, to avoid exactly what we are seeing now, where you can say, oh well, you can use DuckDuckGo instead of Google, but you're not going to get the same kind of effect and reach of being able to get as much information as you would, because Google has a monopoly. I think there are different approaches to this, but recognizing the problem and how they're directly interfering in our elections, as one major example. We talked about Chloe Cole. There are other situations that...
Well, like the Hunter Biden laptop.
Exactly. That's a great example.
Is that not crazy?
It's insane. It's insane. How for people who don't know, it was like just weeks before the general election in 2020, hugely consequential election. You have this discovery of a laptop that Hunter Biden left at a computer store. And then you have, I think it was at 50 or 51 either current or retired senior intelligence officials, like people who headed the CIA, coming out with a blanket statement saying that the contents of this laptop should not be released because it could be disinformation from Russia trying to influence the outcome of our election. And then, I don't know, was it the FBI who told Facebook not to?
FBI told Facebook to expect Russian propaganda in the near future.
Right.
And then that kind of got put in with it. And Mark Zuckerberg on Rogan's podcast said he said he didn't do what Twitter did. Was Twitter just deleted any of those tweets that were
right.
Pointing people in that direction. Facebook just downplayed it or de-escalated its growth, so no one really saw it.
Right. Which is essentially the same thing.
Yeah, and that's like, you can't. That seems totally insane that happened.
Well, think about why. Why did they do this? It was because they were concerned that the information on the laptop would cause people to not vote for Joe Biden and instead vote for Donald Trump. Not a single one of those. I forget what news outlet it was, but they went back once obviously the election was over and the information on the laptop had been released, had gone back to any of those senior intelligence, or all of them actually. They reached out to all of them to say, hey, now that you know what you know, do you regret making the statement that you made blaming Russia on this? And many of them didn't respond to the question. Those that did, not a single one of them said, I regret it, or I was wrong. Not a single one of them. Most of them saying, well, I stand by my statement. This is such an egregious, I mean, this has to be called out for what it is. This is people in major positions of power and influence, essentially stealing our democracy, stealing our right as voters to have all the information available to us before making this hugely consequential decision on who our president should be. But yet, this is the problem, right? This is the game that you're talking about.
Yeah.
This is the problem, is like, no one's holding these people to account. No one's holding their feet to the fire. No one's demanding like, hey, you know, you have completely discredited yourself if you're not willing to say, hey, I was wrong.
Yeah, that's like one of the Saul Alinsky, again, one of the rules, and he's got a whole section. That's not just one of his rules. He's got a whole section on the rules of the means to an end. And it's basically, if you're you do whatever it takes. You do whatever it takes to get to what you want. And that's why people, you know, in that situation, they go, no, I don't regret my statement, because it's a means to an end. And they got what they wanted, which was to get a bunch of people not to see information that may affect the way that they vote.
And that is such a dangerous mindset. Dangerous mindset where, again, it's so short-sighted, because you know that that's true. And I've talked to people personally who have said, like, you know, they will do anything and everything to prevent Donald Trump from getting elected president.
He's very hated by a bunch of people.
Hated is lightly used.
There's a level of hatred that's just
it's blinding.
It's blinding, right?
It's blinding. And that's how short-sighted that mentality is. So, you know, means to an end. Use whatever means available and necessary to prevent that specific outcome. Turn the tables around. What about when you're on the other end of that stick and you have the opposing side saying, hey, now it's your side that we believe is the most dangerous thing for America. We're willing to do whatever it takes to stop you or whoever you're advocating, or whatever the case may be. That is such a dangerous mentality to have. And there are examples throughout history of authoritarian dictators who themselves believe, like, I am the righteous one, I am the savior, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes because only I know what's best for the people.
Are you tracking the FTX meltdown at all?
Marginally. I've read kind of the top lines on it.
But yeah, I don't even know what today is. I think it's the 22nd of November. And so this case is unwinding as we speak. But right now it looks bad.
Yeah.
Because these people they set up a big Ponzi scheme for all practical purposes. And with money from that Ponzi scheme, they were the number 2 donor to the Democratic Party.
Right.
Second only to George Soros. So, and this guy, the guy that was running it, Sam whatever, he's this big donor, and then they were setting him up. He was the one that was going to advise the government on how they should structure regulatory environment around digital currency. Yeah. I mean, this is going to get ugly. But that's the kind of situation where you're, on the outside, if you're a normal person in America and you're working on your farm or you're working in your factory or you're doing construction or whatever it is you're doing, you're not thinking that there's just straight Dr. Evil shit going on where this dude's paying to have all these people elected. I mean, you don't think that $100 million has an impact on the way an election turns out? I mean, that's having a huge impact, a huge impact. And so here's this guy, and now he's getting, you donated money, so we're going to let you set up the regulations around cryptocurrency, which is the business that you're in, which is what, and again, I'm not following the case too close, and it's really early, and not a lot of it's come out, but one of the other crypto dudes, CZ, some guy named CZ, he was like, Sam was trying to set the gig up for himself.
Of course. It wasn't out of like this altruism of blockchain technology and cryptocurrency and, all of, for people who are big advocates of that and the opportunity they see for that in the world of technology. That was not it did not appear to be his motivation.
Yeah. And this dude CZ was like, I see what you're trying to do. And he is the one that kind of caused this whole thing to fall apart, which now, of course, you think, well, thankfully it fell apart when it did because it was a big house of cards anyways.
Yeah.
But as you look at this, like I said, as a normal human that lives in America, and you don't think that there's Dr. Evil shit going down where people are buying elections, you're thinking that things are like, hey, this is America. And the fact of the matter is, there is this kind of thing going on. There is this massive amount of influence. The big tech really is doing this kind of thing. The politicians really are bought. And by the way, that company gave money to Republicans as well. They were hedging their bets. They should have hedged their bets better with their freaking Bitcoin, by the way, because it ended up costing. But they hedged their bets, Republican and Democrat. Much more to the Democrats, probably because they thought, oh, well, Democrats are going to be in power, so we better support them right now.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what's really disturbing. This game is being played. The surface of it, we all think it's on the up and up. And as soon as you look below the surface, it's dirty, and it's corrupt, and it's disgusting.
Yeah. That pay to play, I mean, it's a perfect example of the whole pay to play mentality that is so relevant in Washington. I think last time I was on your show, we talked a little bit about big pharma. Same thing. You look at how is it possible that still big pharma has so much power and so much influence in Washington. They get sweet deals so that they can make more profits, even when you're looking at government purchases of government of healthcare, buying prescription drugs. I think most people in society recognize that this kind of outsized influence is wrong, and it's counter to the public interest. And yet many members of Congress are bought off by big pharma, and they won't take those votes. They won't take those votes that hurt the people who give them their campaign donations and give them their campaign checks. Big pharma spends more money on political contributions and lobbying than they do on those crazy television ads that we see all the time of the happy family frolicking in the meadow promoting whatever the drug may be.
Right. Side effects might be suicidal ideations, exactly. Massive diarrhea, and right.
Yep. And I don't think you can watch like one commercial segment without seeing at least one prescription drug ad. And you think about the fact that how TV ads are expensive, very expensive. And then you think about, well, gosh, they're spending multiple times that amount to buy influence in our government to protect themselves.
How does a politician put money in their own pocket from a big pharma?
I think there's a spectrum there. Those who are actually following all the laws make it so that those kinds of contributions make it so that they are getting the vast majority of the money in their political campaign, which gives them security against any potential challenger, are coming from these big corporations and lobbyists rather than from voters. So that's kind of the first thing. If you look at if you're following the letter of the law, even then, you're protecting your own self-interest rather than what's the interest of the people in your constituency who are actually the ones who are hiring you. You look at one of the most egregious examples is where politicians will take money in their campaign and either live in the gray space of and there are examples of this, I'm going to use campaign money to pay for my spouse's salary because my spouse is helping out on the campaign, or I'm going to use, $100,000 to pay for childcare because by paying for childcare, then I can go out and work on my campaign. There was somebody that I worked with in Congress who he actually got convicted because he was breaking the law, but used hundreds of thousands of dollars to pay his rent, to pay for dental bills for his family, to pay for all kinds of personal expenses. And still to this day, he's just this is a witch hunt. This is, they're coming after me because they don't like what I'm saying. No, dude, you broke the law, But there's a whole spectrum there. I think all of which end up in a place where these are self-serving interests rather than actually being accountable to your voters.
How do you, because I get asked this, how do you square up the distrust of the government with, I'm going to serve in the armed forces? A question I get asked a lot.
Yeah.
And I answer it, but how do you answer that? You're not active duty, but you're a current reservist.
Yeah.
You go on active duty on a pretty regular basis. and yet how the sausage is made in Washington, D.C. How do you square those two opposing things that are going on?
I'm proud to wear the uniform of this country and the American flag. I'm proud to do my part in upholding that oath that we take when we enlist in the service. I'm honored to serve with great Americans who share that same mission and those ideals. I have, because I'm in the reserves and not active duty, I'm in the unique position of also being able to try to effect change in the political sense, recognizing we have a civilian-led military, in trying to lead our country in the right direction, to where we are honoring that vision that our founders had for us, that we are honoring the service and sacrifice being made by our brothers and sisters in uniform and their families, and that we are making the best decisions that serve our own national security interests and the freedom and prosperity of the American people. When we have people in politics who are so compromised by the military-industrial complex or one interest or another that is not the interests of the country and the American people, obviously those in the military are the ones who suffer the consequences when they make self-serving decisions. Even as somebody who served in Iraq, like you, whether we agree or disagree with those decisions that are made by those civilians in leadership, it does not undermine the promise that we make to each other and to the Constitution as we continue to fulfill that promise.
Yeah, obviously for me, besides the just freaking awesome job that it is being in the military, which I loved being in the military, but when you're in the military, you have an opportunity to sort of mitigate the bad decisions that get made, and you also get the opportunity to shape the military itself. So when you're in the military, you can do a much better job of taking people and getting people the right mindset that's going to be beneficial for the country and for whatever country we're going into.
Yeah.
As opposed to if you're not in the military and you're sitting on the outside saying, well, it should be like this. Oh, if you're in the military, you can actually make some of those things happen.
Exactly.
And you can do it within the guidelines that are set forth by the military, but you can do it in a positive way. So I guess that's how I always try to square it myself.
It's so true. It's so true. And right now, I'm grateful to, I often have the opportunity to go and provide in the Army, they call it LPD. It's like Leadership Professional Development sessions with either soldiers who are going through training pipelines or those who are out in the force for exactly that purpose, to hopefully have an impact in helping make sure that we have discerning leaders in the military, not just robots who, aren't actually thinking through the kind of responsibility that they have, regardless of their rank, as they're carrying out their task and their mission.
The other cool thing for you is you being able to explain to leaders in the military, hey, this is what it looks like from the governmental side. You should probably go brief every military unit with what's going on with that. Because, even when I was in, I would kind of try and grasp that and try and explain to people, hey, this is what it looks like from a political perspective. But for you, that's you have the real experience to say, hey, this is why we're getting asked to do this. Yeah. This is what it looks like. Here's what it took to get this decision made. Yeah. Here's why we need to execute it. Here's what happens if we don't. So that's pretty powerful.
It is. And I've had the opportunity to work a lot within the special operations community, particularly because they are looking for this kinds of insight. And one thing I've really appreciated, especially in the special operations community versus the conventional military, where it's not really encouraged so much, but really that problem-solving mindset, a little bit of that challenging mindset, where being a robot is discouraged. You are actually encouraged and incentivized to be somebody who's like, hey, how can we do this better? Or why is this actually the best way? Or how was this decision made, whether you're an NCO or an officer? And I just having that, encouraging that critical thinking and recognizing, again, the impact that you have on people is so important. And I wish it was something that was more encouraged across the military as a whole.
What are you right now, a lieutenant colonel?
Yeah.
Dang. All right, when do you up for Colonel? Full bird Colonel.
I think the window opens maybe in about a year or two. I'm not exactly sure, but we'll see. The results of the command board are supposed to come out any day now, and I'll find out if I have the privilege of being selected to be a battalion commander for a civil affairs reserves battalion.
What are your chances?
Should be pretty awesome.
Is it like how hard is it to get selected for that?
It all depends on, in the reserves, it's a little bit different than the active duty, where obviously you've got to be able to balance your time with whatever your civilian job or profession might be with the responsibilities of being a battalion commander. So it kind of depends on how many people are opting in or out on any given year. But there's a lot more. It is competitive. It is competitive.
If you get picked up as a reservist battalion commander, how much time do you have to spend like active as a battalion commander? Do you have to do more?
On paper, you have the same minimum requirement of, the 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year. Mm-hmm. But a friend of mine was selected last year. He's a little bit ahead of me. And there's a lot of love time, as we say. There's a lot of love time. Because in a reserve unit, you rely a lot on your full-time staff, the full-time reservists who are running the staff shops, the personnel shop, the opoperations shop, and supply and everything else. And he's going to give me his best practices, because he's just like, he runs his own business. It's kind of, and his business is doing very well. He has different projects around the world, and he's also a reserve battalion commander. And he's just like, it's a lot. It's a lot, but it's freaking awesome.
Yeah. And so, other than that, what else you got going on right now?
What else are we doing?
You got the Tulsi Gabbard show.
The Tulsi Gabbard
which you finally launched.
I know, it took forever.
You came and talked to Echo and I about that. I think that's why you stopped by. You came by to like suck our brains on what, how to do a podcast.
Yeah.
And Echo decided to give you all of his advice.
Yeah. Yep. I took notes. We took all of the advice. After that, I ended up getting deployed to East Africa and was gone for a while, and then came back, and just, lot of things happened. But yeah, finally pushed it out. And it's just, it's such a great opportunity and platform to be able to dive into, different issues, different topics, have great conversations. And so, where people like the guy in the, the coffee shop in Greensboro, he's like, oh my God, why don't you leave a Democrat? Oh, okay, go listen. This episode 1 will tell you exactly the answer to what you're looking for.
How often are you doing the podcast? Come out once a week?
Once a week, every Tuesday. Push out a new episode every Tuesday.
And where are you recording them? Wherever?
I am, for the most part, recording at home in Hawaii. We got rid of a living room. We lived in a tiny 2-bedroom place, and decided that having a studio was more practical than having a living room. Hell yeah. Literally, we were like, if we're just sitting around on the couch, we're not using our time very well. So we got rid of the couch, and my husband's a cinematographer, so he put together a studio. Oh. And so I'm sure there will be on the road ones at different points, but so far, doing them from home in Hawaii.
Then what? Do you have a Substack? Did I see that?
Yeah. So
what's going on with
recognize, like my whole approach is there's so many different platforms that people get information from. And some people like to listen to podcasts. Other people don't like podcasts, and they would rather watch cable news. And other people don't like any of that and would rather read. And so for each of the episodes, at a minimum for each of the podcasts that I'm putting out, that I'm talking about a different issue, I jot down my notes and put them out on Substack for people who just want to get a little bit of a summary of where I stand on certain things, or my thoughts or views on something that might be happening in the news or something like that.
And then YouTube, you're on YouTube.
We're on YouTube, on Rumble.
And you're you're on Rumble. Rumble, Echo Charles. Mm-hmm. What's up?
Oh, I think we're on Rumble, yeah.
Wait, you think we're on Rumble? Because I know I talked to you about getting us on Rumble.
Yeah, I think it's a matter of how many episodes are on Rumble.
Okay, so we're kind of on Rumble?
Let me double check that for I'll get back to you.
Okay, right on. I appreciate that.
He'll circle back. He'll circle back.
And then you're doing some spots on Fox News. You sat in for Tucker Carlson the other night.
Yeah. Second time he or his team asked for me to guest host for him when he was off, and that's a new experience. I've never done that before anywhere else, and hosting an hour, 44 minutes when you count in commercials of live television is definitely a new experience. A different level of like, there ain't no room for mistakes.
It's a thing. It's a thing that people have. Some people are good at it. Like when you go and you see what the news, what are they called? Newscasters, broadcasters, what are they called? Hosts, what are they called?
He would be a host because he's more on the opinion side of things than like your Brett Baer on Fox. He's a little bit more of like a news more of a straight news guy. When you see
that job, I would not like that job.
Yeah.
Do you like it?
I had a lot more fun than I expected to have, to be honest. It was certainly a lot of, because his show is on every night, and obviously Tucker's been doing this forever, and he's good at it. Mm-hmm. I'd say, I mean, he has the top rated show on Fox News. And so, for me going in, sometimes they have guest hosts who literally just show up and then they get given the whatever's going to be on the teleprompter. I wouldn't do that for anybody. If I'm reading words on a teleprompter, they're going to be words that I wrote. Mm-hmm. And so working with his team to write and structure the show, all within the span of like a 6-hour time frame, it's a lot. And, but I actually did end up having fun, just taking advantage of the opportunity to be able to share my own views on what's happening and have conversations with people. It is challenging, and like, okay, you get 4 minutes to talk to somebody and you got somebody in your ear. Like literally, like I asked the first question and the producer's like, okay, you have 90 seconds. Yeah. Like, okay, rap. And I'm like, oh my God, like I would love to either challenge what they're saying or ask another follow-up or whatever. And
it is the weirdest medium. My buddy Leif, who I wrote books with, and when his wife worked at Fox News, and Jenna Lee. And so when I would go to New York, a lot of times I would just stay with them. And so I would kind of see her schedule and life. And I was like, oh my God. Yeah. It's
grueling.
It's grueling. Yeah. I didn't want anything to do with that. So even the 1 hour session, now I guess you're going to get good. A person would get better at it, and you could see that Jenna, she was totally comfortable with it. I mean, it's just the way it is.
It's just like anything.
Yeah, just like anything else, you're going to get used to it. But that's have you ever been on Maria's show, Maria Bartiromo?
I have, yeah.
I was so impressed with that woman when I've gone on her show. I've gone on her show a number of times, and she's got to be so smart. Yeah. I would sit there and go, because you're watching her beforehand, you're watching her in between, because like you said, in between they're like, hey, we got this one, and here's these numbers, and then like boom, the camera goes back on, the red light comes on, and she's all just squared away with everything she's saying.
Yeah.
It's a different kind of human.
You can tell.
Well, there's a skill. I guess there's a certain, like Michael Jordan's going to be good at basketball. Yeah. There's a certain type of human being that's going to be good at that job.
Yeah. You've got to be, obviously you've got to be very focused, and you've got to be able to discern kind of all of the activity and voice in your ears and everything else that's going around. You got to be able to separate kind of the noise from the task at hand and not allow yourself to be shaken or distracted by whatever is going on around you. And that's part of it.
So are you going to do it more?
We'll see. They say they've been pretty happy with it, and so they're saying like, okay, well, we look forward to having you do it more often.
We used to catch a lot of crap for going on Fox News. Mm-hmm. Like it was, I have, because I'll go on Fox News. I still go on Fox News. You know how many times CNN has asked me to be on CNN?
Zero. Yeah.
Zero.
Yeah.
Same thing with any other. Fox News asked me.
MSNBC.
Yeah, MSNBC. They don't ask me to come on and talk to them.
Yeah.
But I guess especially.
The same thing.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. It towards the end of first of all, like throughout the entire time that I was in Congress, I was asked on all three of the different networks. Over the years, the invitations have shifted and changed based on whatever I was advocating for. If like CNN wasn't really going after it, then like, oh, I wonder why I don't hear from this show or that show.
That literally happened to you.
Literally.
When you first showed up,
noticeably.
when you first showed up as a congresswoman,
Yeah.
and you were kind of like a little bit of a kind of a rising star, right?
So they say.
So you were a rising star. Were they calling you all the time?
All the time. And I just like, I was just, over the years, people are like, oh, well, who's your publicist? Who's doing all this? I was like, my phone's just ringing. I don't have a publicist. I have somebody who used to be like a communications intern who's answering the phone calls, but it was very, very unexpected. And I was just like, okay, like I'll take advantage. Like if it makes sense, then I'll take advantage of this platform to be able to say what I want to say. But it was a palpable shift over the years as, I would speak out on a certain issue or, I didn't support Hillary Clinton in 2016. And that was like, oh, okay,
Blasphemy. Well,
it was literally considered blasphemy in politics. And then again in 2020, when I ran for president, it was, I saw this shift just throughout that campaign where there was already a negative bias towards me from the day that I announced my candidacy because I had a track record of being somebody who called it straight and was very outspoken against the foreign policy establishment in Washington and their decisions. And that progressed throughout the campaign where it got to a point where instead of even covering me or instead of mentioning, hey, this person is a candidate for president, they just stopped including my name in articles about Democrats running for president completely as though I didn't exist. It was a media blackout at a certain point. Throughout the time, Fox News consistently has been a platform where I've been invited on consistently.
Did they invite you to talk about issues that you were in disagreement with them?
Yeah. Over the years.
They just didn't care.
And they didn't care. And one thing that I've heard from different hosts of different shows and even some of the, like the executives at Fox is like, Tulsi, we really like having you on because we never know what you're going to say. Literally. You are unpredictable. And that's why our audience likes you because you're an interesting person. You have something interesting to say that's not just like one party's talking points or, whatever the popular thing is of the day. And I think that says something about media as a whole. But the fact that they just say, come on and say your piece, I go on and say my piece, whether the host agrees or disagrees, maybe that's part of the conversation, but it's not the deciding factor of whether they have me on or not.
But the other news networks, it was a deciding factor.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and that's what people on social media are like, oh, how come you're always on Fox News? You're letting them take advantage of you and all this other stuff. It's like, no, I'm taking advantage of the platform, number one, because they reach millions of people more than any other cable news network. And number two, CNN and MSNBC, they haven't asked me on their air for years on any issue. Like Eve, I reached out once on veterans issues, toxic burn pits, things that I've worked on in Congress and still really passionate about and trying to advance. No interest whatsoever.
That's like kind of crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very revealing. Very revealing.
So you would reach out to CNN and say, hey, I would like to talk to you about the veterans that have been around these toxic burn pits and now they've got diseases. Would you like to do this? And they'd be like, no.
The response I got back, and that was the last time I reached out, the response I got back was like, oh, interesting. Let me check with the producers. And then radio silence. Like they didn't have the balls to come back and say like, yeah, no thanks, not interested. It was just like no response.
Well, you have your own platform now, right? You got the podcast, the YouTube channel, the Substack thing going on. TulsiGabbard.com. You're on
TulsiGabbard.com. I'm working on a book right now as well. 2 books actually, focused on why I left the Democratic Party, and the other book focused on the cost of war.
Or do you already have a publisher for these?
I do.
Sweet. And so when are these things coming out?
Working on the sequencing, but I hope to have one of the books out by, I don't know, early next year, spring.
What about politics in your future?
I don't know is the honest answer. It's, I want to be in a position where I can best make a positive impact and where I feel I can best serve. I am terribly concerned for all of the reasons that we've talked about today about the failure. It's not even a lack of leadership. It's a sincere failure of leadership in this country. And if there is a way for me to actually directly impact that leadership, then I will pursue that, whether that means I'm running for office or trying to impact those who are in office. We'll see. The vehicle is less important than the impact to me.
But you may go back into politics?
Sure.
All right. What is it? Echo.
Yes.
What do you got? Anything else?
No, I was gonna ask that. You we running for anything, or thinking about it, or what? But we got that answer. We're still surfing, obviously.
Yes,
Water
not as
Woman
often
never
as
died.
I'd like, but no.
How much are you
Water
traveling
Woman
now?
is alive as well. A lot lately. A lot. I've been on the road in the last 2 months. I've probably been home, 2 weeks out of that period of time.
You spend a lot of time campaigning for people too.
Yes, which was, after I announced that I was leaving the Democratic Party, becoming an independent, my phone started ringing off the hook from people in what they call the swing states, the states that can either go Democrat or Republican, a lot of close races, and people inviting me to come out and help campaign for them, recognizing that there are a lot of undecided people, whether they're independents or Democrats or Republicans, who are frustrated with the current state of affairs and current leadership. And so, I
Who reached out to you mostly? Democrats or Republicans?
Republicans.
Did any Democrats reach out to you?
No. If there were a Democrat running for Congress who was openly calling out the insanity of the Democrat leadership of today and taking a strong stand on the things we're talking about, on just basic fundamentals of freedom, I would have happily gone and campaigned for them. Not a single one reached out. And I've been looking for those courageous voices to actually step out. And unfortunately, that hasn't been there. And I've heard from some people privately, just and really over the last few years, who are saying, "Hey, thank you so much for speaking out on these things. I appreciate what you're doing, but also don't tell anyone." And so it's sad, it's unfortunate, but part of the last thing I said in my announcement of leaving the Democratic Party is I invite other Democrats to join me.
Has anyone?
Not yet. Not yet.
All right. So, I guess we should real quick talk about supporting this podcast. Of course, you're going to support Tulsi's podcast, but if you want to support this podcast, you want to support America, and you want to support yourself, you can. You can do it. We got a bunch of different ways for you to do it. How has your energy drink been?
Love it.
So you immediately went for a mango flavor, which is is it safe to say this is more of a Hawaiian vibe?
Yeah, especially with the lilikoi in there, aka passion fruit.
Okay, so we got a little bit of that going on. You can get this stuff from JockoFuel.com. You can get it at Wawa. You can get it at Vitamin Shop. You can get it. We're in all military commissaries.
I've noticed that. I was in the commissary at Kaneohe Marine Corps Base a week and a half ago, and I almost took a picture. I was like, "Hey, there's Jocko Fuel."
We're about to be in the exchanges too, which is cool because if you're in the military, the commissaries, basically families go to commissaries. Like the young enlisted guys, they're not going to the commissary. It takes too much time or whatever. But they go to the exchange, they sell gas and whatever, beer.
Yeah.
So now you can get some Jocko Fuel. You will be able to in the very near future. But
how do you like? Is there a red taped process to get into a store?
There is. Yep.
So I was at a gun shop the other week ago, whatever, and they're like, "Hey, bring those energy drinks. We want to sell them or whatever." I can't just be like, "Oh, I got some at home," and bring them, right? Or can I?
Wait, which store was it? Like a local.
Yeah. San Diego discount on Mart.
Yeah, we go wholesale. So if anybody wants to do wholesale, this is like if you got a store, you got a gym, you got a jiu-jitsu academy, you can go to JFSales at jockofuel.com and email that, and you get a wholesale account set up, and that then you can do it.
Okay, so the red tape is more for the store, really. Right. Yeah,
a little bit, but not really. I mean, when somebody wants to bring something into their store, they can just get a wholesale account and set up. Now, if they have a big chain store, that's where you run into. And at some point, I got to do some kind of a podcast about what it goes on.
That'd be interesting.
Because, for instance, it's kind of cool. It's kind of complimentary when you start making a dent. All of a sudden, the big giant billion-dollar corporations realize that you're making a dent, and they come after you. So, for instance, I don't know how much I can say about this, but I'll say a little bit. In one particular store that we're in, one of the big companies came in and paid millions of dollars for our slots in this particular store. And
like slots meaning room on the shelf.
Room on the shelf.
Interesting.
They said, we really don't want Jocko Fuel to be out there. We see what they're doing. We see their growth. We don't like it. We have to go on the offense. And so they paid millions and millions of dollars to take our shelf space from us. And I can't even be mad at the store, because the store is trying to make profit and they're trying to do what they're doing.
Yeah.
And they also have to keep a relationship with the big giant companies. Otherwise, they won't be able to supply things that those big giant companies put out there. So that's what happens. That's the fight we're in right now. It's kind of cool because it means you're growing to a point where, and the weird thing is, people kind of, all these big companies, and when I say big companies, I'm not mincing anything. I'm talking about the biggest companies there are. They know what we're doing. They're now taking active countermeasures to try and shut us down, because they know that kind of on a product, they can't beat us because we held the line. We're making it good for you. We're doing all these things that they're not going to do. They would rather sacrifice millions of dollars to buy that shelf space than
create a better
product. So
that says a lot about competition.
That's what we're up against. And cool. Like, this is it. This is what we're doing. And we're going to have some setbacks like that. But the cool thing is, the product is better. We know it's better. They know it's better. Otherwise, they would just go toe to toe, right?
Oh, yeah.
You'd just be like, cool, let's do this.
Yeah.
But they don't want to do that.
Man, there are some interesting parallels to what we were talking about substance versus trying to silence or push out anybody who has a counter narrative. Same. I mean, you're seeing it play out.
Seeing it play out now. But it is crazy, and that's why big corporations with billions of dollars, they do their best to destroy the smaller companies that are growing. And that's the way it is. And we'll see how it plays out. I can tell you how it's playing out right now. It's playing out good because we're going to continue to make the best product. We're going to continue to grow. And the cool thing is the demand signal. The demand signal, that's what, like in this particular store that I'm talking about, and it's a whole group of stores, but they took some slots. The big billion-dollar corporation took some slots, but the store wouldn't give up all of them. They took some, but they said, hey, man, people are in here every day for that Jocko Fuel. We're not giving this up. We're not taking this away from our customers.
Yeah.
We can't just screw over our customers. We can screw them over a little bit, but we can't screw them all the way over. So they kept a bunch of our product in the store, but not as much as we wanted, but it's fine. It's fine. So if you want to support America, and you want to support the growing companies, you want to support people that are growing things in America, then jockofuel.com. It's the same thing with Origin USA. OriginUSA.com. And by the way, next time you're in North Carolina, you got to go to our factory down there.
I know. I've been talking to Pete.
Yeah.
And I think we may have something planned in December. We'll see.
Good. I was supposed to go down there. I was supposed to go to the North Carolina factory for Veterans Day. Instead, I went to the main factory because there was a freaking hurricane hitting North Carolina. So I couldn't go down there. But yeah, next time you're down there, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
The billion-dollar corporations see what we're doing. The weird thing is they saw what we were doing, and like before we were even doing very much, they were threatened. And I think I think it's because the truth is so threatening. And when you have someone that's like, no, actually you can build this stuff in America, and when for years they say you can't do it, you can't do it, you can't, they're lying. And so now there's someone saying, oh yeah, look at this over here. Look what we're actually doing right now, 100% in America. Look. And they are scared. And so since day one, they've been onto us. The food companies, they're kind of taking notice in the last 6 months where they're like, oh shit. The clothing companies, they've been on us because they're scared because we're doing everything right and they're doing everything wrong. And that's just all there is to it.
I think they recognize too kind of the difference between the fast fashion, just buying like the cheap stuff, use it a few times and then throw it away, versus the conscious choice that I think a lot of people are starting to make is like, okay, I might pay a few more dollars, but I will take pride in knowing that in Origin's case, from the cotton that's grown to the final hands that are putting those jeans in a bag, these were American hands and hard work and sweat that went into creating this, and I will wear this with pride.
Yeah, and by the way, that hard work, these are people that have mortgages, that are learning, like we got kids, I shouldn't call them kids, but people that are 23 years old, 22 years old, that now have a skill, that they have a career now. Whether it's running a loom, whether it's running a press, whatever skill they're getting a skill that they can now they have a real job, they have a career, they have a life. So that's what you're supporting. Also, environmentally, this is America.
Exactly.
We treat the environment well. Those factories that you're buying from overseas, especially from these companies that claim to be environmental companies and they're producing their stuff. Why are they producing their stuff overseas? Because overseas they don't have the regulations. They don't have the environmental regulations that we have to abide by, which we do gladly because we care about the environment. We care about the water, right?
Exactly.
We care about the nature. We care about animals. That's what we do. And so these big companies, they know that we're right. And they are so horrified that the word's getting out. The word's getting out that we're here, we're doing it. They're horrified. If you want to help that out, originusa.com. Get something that you're going to wear for the next 18 years.
Exactly.
You're going to wear a pair of jeans for 14 years. You're going to wear a pair of these boots forever. They might be forever. I mean, how long are you going to live? Maybe you live to be 100, right? But you're going to use a jiu-jitsu gi? Get one gi, get two gis. You can use them forever.
Yeah.
And by the way, our jiu-jitsu gi, you can wash it in a normal washing machine. It doesn't take 9 hours to dry out. Like we're in a totally different world.
Yeah. Plus, it's Christmas coming up.
Christmas is coming up. Christmas coming up, and the economy. We all know the economy needs help.
Yeah.
Well, how do you help the economy? When you buy something from Origin, you're helping the economy here in America. There's a worker that's getting paid, that's earning their career, that's paying their rent, paying their mortgage because of that. And then what do? They take that paycheck and they put it back into America. It's like, that's what we're doing. So, originusa.com.
Yep. Speaking of stuff. Speaking of Christmas, sometimes you want to get a shirt or something, There's people representing. I'm telling you, you want a Discipline Equals Freedom shirt or hat or hoodie, whatever, go to jockostore.com.
Yeah. Speaking of which, my youngest daughter is wrestling at this time. It's wrestling season. Yeah. We need some rash guards for her. Just
I got you.
You can kind of make that happen.
Yeah. We got a few rash guards on there.
She wants to represent.
There you go.
Yeah, on the path. I said, I'll get you a shirt too.
All right.
You don't have one already. Maybe get you a tank top, something like that. Also, Shirt Locker. It's a subscription scenario where you get a shirt every month. Some good stuff coming out. No free dopamine. That's going to be a good one.
That one kind of gets some traction on that, huh?
I like that.
Yeah,
no free dopamine.
There's some good ones on there. Good thing, too, if you sign up, no matter when you sign up, you have access to all the past shirts. Like if you think, you missed out or something like that, you got access to that when you sign up. So whatever you need. JockoStore.com.
Again, like back in the day when I was a kid, if you had some kind of crazy sort of movement in your life that you wanted to make a statement about, just get a T-shirt, bro.
Yeah.
You don't need to get any kind of surgery, man. Get a T-shirt. Right. Put your statement on the T-shirt. Wear a Discipline Equals Freedom T-shirt.
There you go. Yep.
And if in 8 years, if you decide, you know what, I'm not really all about that discipline anymore, cool. You get a different T-shirt. Let's get some donuts, right? Let's stick with that.
There's an anti-donut shirt coming out too, by the way. Shirt Locker.
Wow, that's controversial, man.
That's highly controversial.
Yeah, that one was kind of hard to pull off. Because it's like, how do you... Well, then again, there's a lot of ways to do it, but I think we got it.
Donuts, look, again,
go.
for me, and I get it. I get that there's two sides to every controversial thing in the world, but I just can't support donuts. I can't
ever,
do it.
like
no,
never,
I can't.
ever?
I can't do it.
So let me ask you this. Like every once in a great while, like when I finished day 0 of air assault school in Hawaii, I was like, heck yeah, I'm going to give me some donuts. I earned this shit. Once in a great while.
Yeah, I get it.
What's your once in a great while?
Mint chocolate chip ice cream.
Okay.
And straight just chocolate chip cookies.
All right.
And by the way, if you're out there and you're gonna send chocolate chip cookies to someone, just send them chocolate chip cookies. Don't send them peanut butter cookies. Definitely don't send them oatmeal raisin cookies.
No, that's a violation.
Because oatmeal raisin cookies look at first glance, I got chocolate chip cookies. What is the point? What is the point? So
you might as well eat oatmeal, right?
You might as well eat oatmeal. Come on.
There's two foods that I don't like: oatmeal and cooked carrots. Just
nasty.
I don't know. Just those are just two things. I'm not really picky otherwise, but oatmeal and cooked carrots, I'm not happening.
So Ryan Jobe, task unit bruiser, God bless him. He was killed, or he's wounded in Iraq, died of wounds. He hated cottage cheese, and so the smell of cottage cheese, he would start gagging immediately. And there was a time he was getting, let's say, some counseling from his platoon, and he was under a kangaroo court, right? And they're like, Biggles, his nickname was Biggles. Biggles, if you really love, I forget what it was, but it's something like, if you really love the teams, you're gonna eat this cottage cheese, and like they're spooning it to his mouth, and as it's going to his mouth, he's like heaving it, and he's just choking it down and throwing up. It was freaking hysterical. So yeah,
counseling.
Yeah, he's receiving some character building. You got to watch out but there's certain foods that do that to some people.
Yeah,
and apparently it's cooked carrots.
Yeah, I just don't like them. The thing that that has that effect, like that physical effect, is actually just bananas. Like I will throw frozen bananas in my smoothies. Banana bread, great, but I think it was because in basic training, like. I mean, it was you will eat one banana with every meal, because of whatever, just prevent cramping, like I don't know, whatever it was, and it literally got to a point where I would just like the gag reflex was, so I to this day I won't eat.
That's crazy, huh? Because the banana in the milkshake that's the Tulsi jam. Oh no, the frozen banana.
Yeah. Totally fine. Yeah, I won't.
We actually owe you money on that. Like,
that's
we've been propping up the Tulsi frozen banana for a while.
It adds just that little bit of cream, and I love it.
We all do.
But it's just like that the fresh.
There was I was on deployment. I was on a ship on deployment. This back in the day, no war going on. We're just trying to get jacked, and there was this protein shake that was vanilla, and I was drinking it like breakfast, lunch, and dinner, trying to put on the gains, right? And it was, by the time probably 2 months into a 6-month deployment, I had to hold my nose and drink it like it was just a shot of tequila, just like, it made me want to throw up. And that kind of gave me like the kind of banana PTSD you're talking about.
It's more the association.
Yeah,
right?
Even to this day, vanilla is not one of my favorites, just because of that 1 6-month period of choking down.
Yeah.
When you go on deployment and you have like a palate and it's just filled with one flavor, you're screwed.
Totally.
Especially because on a ship, like the food kind of sucks. And if you're not getting good, you got to get your protein from somewhere. So there you go.
But he can't technically, back to the donuts thing real quick. He can't advocate even for moderation.
I painted myself into a corner with donuts. I painted myself into a corner with donuts. Probably the one of the few things in the world, other than if you're ISIS, we're not going to get along. The other one is like, I can't really decide, hey, maybe donuts are okay on this occasion. Even when people have like protein donuts, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, hell yeah.
Like Nutrition Solutions, they make protein donuts. Yep. I'm sure they're good to go. Yeah. And I'm sure they're like in compliance with the path.
Yeah, yeah.
But I just can't do it because it's a moral victory for the donut.
Yeah,
the donut still got in there.
Yeah, you declared anti-donut early on too.
Yeah, I went hard.
Yeah. So you cannot, just like how you.
Now,
and also,
hey, wait, is it my ego though? Is it just my ego?
It's part of the gig for sure.
Or is it just, hey, I'm going to just maintain the path here?
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. I don't know. It's like, but there's that other part too, though, just like the alcohol. You know how you're like, hey, I can't advocate for alcohol at all. Yep. Well, even though we all know that, hey, most people in moderation, then they're not going to have problems. Yeah. But you start advocating for donuts, alcohol, or whatever. Some people are like, hey, Jocko said it's okay.
Yeah,
so they start freaking pounding donuts every week, you know? Can't do that kind of stuff.
Because moderation can be subjective.
Yes, exactly. Right.
I'll only eat 5 a week instead of 10.
I ate less today than I did yesterday, so whatever, you know.
Wait, you're vegan, right?
Yeah.
Now, are donuts vegan?
Some are. And there is a pop-up in Hawaii that only opens up for 4 hours on the weekends, and it's first come, first serve, and they usually sell out in the first hour.
Vegan donuts.
And they are, I will show you pictures afterward. They are the most
heavenly,
luxuriously like, oh my gosh. You just look at it and it's like a whole meal in one donut. It's like, it's a totally different
Where do you
situation.
get your protein from?
I take, I drink protein shakes every day, and it's primarily coming from a pea protein source. I used to do whey protein, but
How long have you been a vegan for?
Probably the last, 4 or 5 years, vegetarian my whole life, and then
ethical reasons, environmental reasons, spiritual reasons.
All of the above.
Have you ever had a steak before?
No. No.
I feel like I want to
take you to dinner. That response is the response that I've gotten most often, especially in the military. But it's like, it's not something I've ever had. So it's like you saying that, I have no desire whatsoever. Yeah. Rogan, I met Rogan for lunch or dinner or whatever one day with some of his friends, and they went to what's the Brazilian Fogo de Chao. And he didn't really comment it on the time, but he mentioned recently in a podcast, he's like, we went there and all she ate was salad. How is that even possible? But it's not there's no craving, I guess.
That's interesting. You guys just discuss, because, diet, how to raise kids, I think exercise might be another one. Religion and politics; those are the hot button subjects.
So we're covering all of them today.
Yeah,
but this is the one you guys are opposed, though. That's the thing.
But I think this is like a good example, though, because it's one thing to say, like, hey, this is my choice for my life and my lifestyle. Mm-hmm. I'm not trying to go around saying every single person in the world has to follow my exact life choices in all of those examples that you just mentioned.
If we hung out more, like if I moved back to Hawaii and and we were hanging out more, would you kind of start to be like, hey, man, why are you eating all that steak? Do you think you would, to try and help me?
Not unless you were saying, hey, Tulsi, I feel like shit and my body's not functioning. What would you advise, or what's working for you? But otherwise, no.
That's kind of good, because then that's what I was thinking too. As you were saying that, I was thinking, if you said to me like, hey, I don't feel that good, I feel lethargic, I'd be like, hey, we're going out for steak, girl. All right. What else? Echo Charles. So there's the shirt lockers, stuff
Jocko
like
store.
this.
Yep, subscribe.
JockoUnderground.com. This is a platform that we made in case we get kicked off of other platforms. Straight up, that's what's going on.
That's the reality of what we face.
And so if you go to JockoUnderground.com, you can get on that platform. It costs $8.18 a month.
How did you choose that number, by the way? I've always been curious.
Should we? Is
it an area code thing or?
No, well, actually, put it this way: there was the first reason, the primary reason, and then there's like a secondary reason that shuffled like right in there as well. The secondary reason is from the Bible. It's like current sufferings don't outweigh future glory, something like this. And then, but the primary reason was hardcore recondos.
Yeah, it's HR. It's the 8th letter and the 18th, which we've never divulged until this moment.
Yeah. Wow.
So that's what it is. The hardcore recondos out there.
Both of those are pretty powerful.
Meanings. There we are.
Yep.
And look, if you can't afford that, which I get, it's tight times and they're going to get tighter. There's a recession. Am I allowed to say there's a recession coming?
I think there are a lot of economists who would agree with you.
If times get too tight and you can't afford it, just email assistance at jockounderground.com. We'll get you hooked up there. And check out Tulsi's Substack.
Yep.
Where they just Google Substack.
Tulsi. If you go on Substack and you just put in Tulsi or Tulsi Gabbard,
how much does it cost?
Pop
does it cost
there.
money?
Almost everything I put up is not behind a paywall. If you want to kind of get in on the conversation, I think it's like $6 a month or something.
How'd you come up with that number, $6 a month?
It's just the average of what's out there.
Okay.
I don't have a Bible verse to back it up.
Dang.
Clearly a missed opportunity.
All right. Just giving you that opportunity. Then YouTube, we got the Jocko podcast YouTube channel.
Yep.
And Origin USA YouTube channel. And then the Tulsi Gabbard Show, I think, is your YouTube channel.
Yep.
And subscribe to that.
Everywhere you get your podcasts. These platforms are growing. They're new. And so for people, if you watch or you listen and you like it, subscribe, leave a rating, and share it with others.
That's the plan. Psychological warfare is out there. You need that.
You need that Jocko influence.
Maybe I need some Jocko discipline to make a new one of those.
Yeah,
it's been a while. You need to ask me some of those questions.
What's like good for the goose is good for the the other guy.
Flipsidecanvas.com, Dakota Myers Company. I've written a bunch of books. Only Cry for the Living, by Holiday
Again,
Kay.
great Christmas gifts.
Oh, there you go.
I think people are it's just like, when I think of gifts that I want to give people, they should be gifts of meaning and substance, ideally, rather than just something that is cheap and can be easily thrown away and become part of a landfill somewhere.
Yeah.
That's what I think,
books are good.
These books are fantastic. Some of the things you're talking about earlier, because for me, I actually, you can get audiobooks and, e-books and all that, but I'm one of those people who, like, if I'm taking notes and getting ready for a TV interview, I'll look at what's on the computer and then I actually sit there and actually write it down. There's something about reading words on the page that you can keep going back to, you can highlight, you can kind of bend the corner of the page over and know that that's something that you can use and keep going back to over time.
Yeah, I am a huge physical books guy, and there's definitely some sort of rote memorization that happens or absorption that happens when you write stuff down, you highlight it and all that stuff. So yeah, you can get all these books for Christmas for somebody and they can really help. I'll tell you what, honestly, just get the kids, get the kids, the Warrior Kid books.
Yep.
Just to help them with life. It'll help them in so many different ways. And there's so much. Look, we spent the first, 40 minutes today talking about all the negative influence that there is out there on kids and social media. Don't let them be exposed to that. Or if they do get exposed to it, let them have some kind of a grounding and a foundation to think through what's going on and get on the right path as a human being. Way the Warrior Kid. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is coming, by the way.
Oh, damn.
Yeah. It's called Letters from Uncle Jake. So there you go. Echelon Front Leadership Consultancy. Go to echelonfront.com for details if you need help inside your organization, whatever organization that is. Let us know. We can help you. We have some live events. Orlando, April 3rd through the 5th, and Dallas, October 18th through the 20th. We've sold out every one of these that we've ever done. So if you want to go, get in early. We have an online training, extremeownership.com. It's an online platform training in leadership. Leadership is not something you learn in a day. You can't just go to Tulsi's Army course on leadership and now you're good to go. It's not going to happen. No offense to Tulsi, but it takes more than that.
Yeah.
It's going to take time. So it's like going to the gym. If you want to go to the gym for leadership, you want to go to the gym for life, go to extremeownership.com. If you want to help service members active and retired, you want to help their families, Gold Star families, check out Mark Lee's mom, Mama Lee. She's got a charity organization. If you want to donate or you want to get involved, go to americasmightywarriors.org. And also heroesandhorses.org, where Micah Fink has taken people up into the wilderness so they can find themselves on horseback, getting into the wilderness. So check that out as well. If you want to connect with Tulsi on the interwebs, tulsigabbard.com. On social media, on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook, she's at Tulsi Gabbard. on YouTube at Tulsi Gabbard Show. And she's got her podcast and she's got her Substack that we talked about. So check all that as well. And as far as Echo and I are concerned, Echo's at Echo Charles. I am at Jocko Link. But listen, the algorithm, just watch out for the algorithm.
Yeah.
Because it is definitely looking to grab you.
Yep.
And they're looking to brainwash you. And if you go into it knowing that they're looking to brainwash you, that's a good step in the right direction.
Huge.
But if you go into it thinking that you're getting smarter because of this, that's a bad situation that you're getting yourself into. So just please be careful. Be careful with the social media. Use it. Use it for something positive, though. And only use it for a limited amount of time. All right? Please. There you go. Tulsi, any closing thoughts for us?
God, we covered a lot. It's great to see you guys. Great to be back. I just to add on to what you just said, don't underestimate the power of your own voice. Understand the responsibility that each of us has on the impact that we make in the world, and know that the choices we make every day can lead to having a positive or negative impact. So be an independent thinker, be discerning, and be intentional with the choices that you make, both for yourself and for those around you.
Sounds like a plan. Thanks for joining us again.
Thank you.
I'm sure we'll see you again. Thanks for your service in the Army. Thanks for your service in Congress. Thanks for your service in America. And now I guess thank you for your service to the world as you try and help people by spreading aloha worldwide.
Always.
And thanks to all of our service members around the world in the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines. Thank you for protecting our freedom. The same goes here at home to our police and law enforcement, firefighters, paramedics, EMTs, dispatchers, correctional officers, Border Patrol, Secret Service, all first responders. Thanks for what you do on a daily basis to keep us safe here at home. And everyone else out there, the world is a crazy place right now, and it will drive you crazy if you let it. My recommendation is that you remain sane, that you stay balanced, that you don't let bots or provocateurs or trolls get into your head. Instead, listen, but question what you hear, try and understand what's going on, and then go do some jiu-jitsu. And then, like Tulsi, go spread some of that aloha spirit. And until next time, this is Tulsi and Echo and Jocko out.